Election Day in America, continued control of the Senate and the House, and the future of President Biden's agenda are up in the air at this hour. Good afternoon. I'm Erin Burnett.
And I'm Wolf Blitzer. You're looking at some live pictures right now over at the White House. President Biden expected to address the nation in the coming hours, and we'll, of course, bring that to you live. The White House feeling cautiously optimistic at this hour, particularly after a Senate pickup in Pennsylvania for Democrat John Fetterman.
And Wolf, obviously that was significant. Both sides now anxiously watching every vote. And we are watching three key Senate races that have yet to be decided. That includes Georgia, the Senate race between Herschel Walker and Democrat Raphael Warnock. At this moment, still, we don't know the answer. We don't know what's going to happen there. Raphael Warnock is ahead right now by 17,491 votes. In Nevada, the race between the Republican Senate candidate Adam Laxalt and Democrat incumbent Catherine Cortez Masto also still too close to call. You can see how close that is right now, though. Laxalt is ahead by 22,595 votes, but we only have 80% of the count in. A lot of votes still to come in around Las Vegas. And in Arizona, the Democratic incumbent Mark Kelly still locked in an incredibly tight race with Republican Blake Masters. This one, as you can see, Mark Kelly has the lead right now, 51.4% to 46.4%, but only 69% of the estimated vote is counted at this time. And in the House, let's look at the balance of power. There, we still do not know. There are still seats left to be called right now in the House. 49 seats remaining to be called. We have Democrats leading in some of the key competitive states, and you have Republicans leading in some of the key states. And we're going to be hopefully able to make some calls coming up, but we got Republicans right now leading in 19 competitive seats. So much we do not know about the House and the balance of power. We do have reporters fanned out across the country as we are awaiting the vote count, including Arizona, Georgia, and Wisconsin. That is where we have just called the race for the Republican incumbent Senator Ron Johnson. And I want to start in Arizona, where the race for Senate and governor are still too close to call. That is where Sarah Seidner is standing by. And, you know, Sarah, we're looking at these numbers coming in. All eyes right now in Arizona.
Absolutely. About 70% of the vote has already happened. We're waiting for 30% of the vote. We have just heard, and this is just coming out of the mouth of election officials here in Maricopa County, the most populous county in the state, which usually has an outsized influence on the vote, that they have 275,000 votes that they are currently trying to verify the signatures of those votes, that there are a total of 400,000 total votes that still need to be counted. That's where we are with that. They have also responded to some of the Republican allegations about fraud, about saying that this election is not free and fair, that it was purposeful, some of the mistakes that were made. And there were some mistakes made with the tabulation printers. Those printers did not have dark enough ink, and that caused a problem. They said, look, we fixed the problem, but even if the problem is consistently kept going, they were able to count every single vote from every single voter. And here's what Bill Gates, who is the chairman of the County Board of Supervisors, said. He said, I don't know what they're talking about. We went to court. The RNC and Blake Masters lawyers were in court. They sued to keep the polls open. They never used the word that it was fraud or that there was something criminal that happened. They just wanted to keep the polls open because they were concerned that voters would not be able to get their votes in because of the problems with the tabulation printers. He says, I don't know what they're talking about. There is nothing criminal that has been happening here. There is nothing fraudulent, that they have been watched by just about the entire world, and that they're doing the best they can, but they have sorted out the problems, and every vote will count. Those are the words directly from Bill Gates, the head of the County Board of Supervisors. Guys.
All right. Thank you very much, Sarah. And I know we hope to speak to him later on during our special coverage today. I want to head to Wisconsin, is where I mentioned we have projected that the Republican incumbent Senator Ron Johnson is the winner, narrowly defeating the Democrat Mandela Barnes. So let's go to Milwaukee now, and Lucy Caffenau for the latest on how this played out. Lucy, obviously only able to make this call really in just the past few minutes. This one was very close.
That's right. It was incredibly close. Johnson eking it out with roughly 50.6% of the vote. Barnes just above 49% of the vote. We are still waiting for the final numbers. But look, Democrats initially considered this state and Johnson's seat specifically as one of the most vulnerable ones, at least in terms of flipping it from Republican control to Democratic control. Johnson, back in 2016, pledged not to run for a third term. He changed his mind in January of this year. He was facing Mandela Barnes, the lieutenant governor of Wisconsin, a 35-year-old progressive. He is the son of an auto worker and a public school teacher, initially popular with his Democratic base. But the edge that he had in some of those early polls was evaporated in recent weeks amid a barrage of negative advertising, painting him as being soft on crime, ads that his supporters said were effectively racist. Again, we have not heard from either candidate. We do expect Barnes to speak in about an hour to give an update on the Senate race. Perhaps that will be a concession speech. We have not confirmed that. We're also waiting for Ron Johnson to come out. But if you're a Democrat here in Wisconsin, it's not all bad news. Tony Evers, the Democratic governor, declared victory last night. So that means he will be in power for the 2024 presidential election, where he will have the power to certify the vote. I know a lot of folks are paying attention to that. And so we are now looking at Wisconsin as one of the few states that's going to have a split ticket. You know, a Democrat as governor, and in the Senate we have a Republican. Wolf?
Okay, thanks very much. I'm here with John King at the Magic Wall. John, there's still some uncertainty out there. Let's take a look at the Senate first. Very close right now.
Some uncertainty. That's an understatement. I like that as we start the day. Look, the second day of the count is going to tell us a lot. This is where we're ahead right now. Candidates who are ahead right now, we have a 50-50 Senate. So right now we are where we began, essentially, with a 50-50 Senate. But you look at the called races. That's why we're not there yet. We have to get to the finish line. So what are we looking at? Let's look at the uncalled races, right? The uncalled races are the big ones. In Georgia, number one, we're waiting for the count to finish. They're at 96% there, but still some counting to do. I just want to show you the live outstanding vote. You bring this up here. You see there are still votes to be counted all over the state. If you're the Democrats, you see the bigger blue circles. That means the largest outstanding share of the vote is in areas where the Democrat is leading right now, Senator Warnock. So you're encouraged by that, Wolf, but you still need to count those votes as we play it out and come through it there. So you watch that play out in there. The big question here is, does the ultimate winner, whether it's the Democrat or the Republican, get above 50%, or do we have a December 6th runoff? Most of the people who understand Georgia elections believe we're heading for a runoff, but let's count more votes. Then we move out west, and this gets fascinating and critical. In Arizona, Mark Kelly has what looks like a healthy lead there, but pay attention to that. Still 30% of the estimated vote to be counted, and a lot of it, as Sarah Seidner was saying earlier, is here in Maricopa County. This is 62% of the state population, Phoenix and the suburbs around it. Mark Kelly has a lead right here. Joe Biden won this county by 2.2 points. Mark Kelly is up by more than that. If that stays as they count the remaining ballots, Mark Kelly will win re-election, but there's a lot of ballots to be counted there. And then you come down to Pima County here, and there's still a lot of ballots. This is 15% of the population. So we have a ways to go in Arizona, and the same applies when you get out to Nevada, where the Republican candidate, Adam Laxalt, has a lead right now. About 20% of the vote still out here. When you look at the map here, Wolf, two things to note. Number one, Joe Biden carried Clark County. This is 74% of the statewide population. You need to win Clark County to carry the state. Joe Biden carried it by 9 points. Senator Masto, the incumbent, is not doing that right now. You see there a 4-point lead, 5-point lead if you want to round it a little bit. So she needs to better perform with the ballots that are still outstanding. Democrats believe she can do that with the outstanding ballots, but we have to wait for that count right there. And this is significant as well. The second largest county is Washoe County. Adam Laxalt is ahead in this county. Joe Biden carried it when he won the presidency by 4.5 points. So this is always a swing county. If this one stays red, Laxalt, might have a chance to take this seat. He leads at the moment. So you come back out and you just do the math, right? You do the math. So Democrats here, we can do it this way. Let me switch maps to make it easier for people at home to see in the battle for control. If you look at this right now, these are the three outstanding races. This is where we are heading in, right? So if Mark Kelly holds on to his lead here in Arizona, not certain, we need to count the votes, but he's leading now. If he holds on to that lead, look where we are at 49-49. So if Laxalt holds on to his lead here, and again, that's not certain. He's leading now. I'm just showing you where we are right now. It is possible, if he holds the lead and he holds the lead, that it comes down to this again. Georgia and the potential of a runoff. So later tonight, when we get the counts, especially as the counts progress out here, and as if we can get finality or close to finality in Georgia, that's the biggest question today. Will this be a runoff? Either way, will this be a runoff? And then these western states, what do they tell us?
And just explain to our viewers why there has to be a runoff potentially in Georgia right now. You need 50% plus one vote in order to avoid the runoff.
Yeah, that's the state law. So we bring it up right now. Let's just come back to it again. And look how close you are. Tantalizingly close, right? If you're either one of these candidates, but if you're the Democrat and you're ahead right now by 17,000 votes, you are hoping, I showed you, the majority of the outstanding vote is here, Atlanta and the suburbs. You see them colored in blue. But you see all these red counties, too. There are small pockets of votes still to be counted in those as well. If you're Warnock, you're hoping that you get a decent chunk of that outstanding vote here, and it ticks you up above 50%. But this is why we count, Wolf, and we're going to have to count throughout today, and it's possible it goes past today. That's just the way it works. Already you're starting to hear people saying, why does it take so long? Why does it take so long? It's complicated. You have mail-in ballots, early ballots, day of ballots. It takes a while.
So we'll be busy in early December, presumably, if in fact there is a runoff.
Well, possibly. The question is, if there's a runoff, the question about those two western seats is that runoff for control of the Senate as it was in January? We'll see.
All right, we're ready to make a projection right now. All right, here you see it. In the state of Maryland, CNN now projects that the incumbent Dutch Ruppersberger will be reelected in Maryland, an important win in the contest there in Maryland. There's another projection we're ready to make right now as well. In Michigan, Dan Kildee, the incumbent Democratic representative, he will also be reelected. We are now ready to project, John. The House of Representatives is really important right now because it's close.
So let's come back again. These are races. Follow along because it's important. If you look at that, you think the Republicans have the majority. These are the races where candidates are ahead. They're not called races. So Republicans are on a path as we speak now, if things don't change, to perhaps have a narrow majority in the House. But let's look at called races right now. You need 218 to control the House. 202 to 186 right now. You just gave two more. They're holds for the Democrats, but two more races for the Democrats. So you look at on the map right now, and so then you come to what races have we not called? Well, we have 47 races still to call, right? 19 of those, in competitive seats, Republicans are leading. 18, the Democrats are leading. So you have a tug of war going on right now. Again, if you look at where we are ahead, the logic tells you, looking at that map, that there is still a mathematical possibility that Democrats hold their majority. The probability is that Republicans get a narrow majority as you count them through. But we've got a ways to go. And one of the things you're seeing in this map, number one, this talk of a big red wave simply did not happen.
No shellacking.
If there is a Republican majority, it still complicates Joe Biden's life. But the Democrats are going to defy the historical averages, if you will, in the House elections as we go through. The question is how big. And again, there is a mathematical possibility the Democrats hold the House. We're going to keep counting as we go. That number tells you the probability is you have a narrow House majority. But every time you project a race in a Democrat, those are both holds for the Democrats. That's the challenge as we go, just like in those Senate races. We need patience. We go through the count today. We'll know a lot more at the end of the day than we do right now. But some of these races out here, they could take days and days to count.
Yeah, it's going to be a while. And if you're one of the Republican leaders like Kevin McCarthy, you're pretty nervous right now about this potential Republican majority in the House.
He once talked about 60 seats, then he talked about 30 seats. The math says it's going to be below that, well below that.
I suspect you're absolutely right. All right, coming up, vote counting still underway right now in Georgia. No winner declared in that very close Senate race. Is it headed for a runoff? We'll have a live report from Georgia. That's next.
And we are back with a key race alert. New numbers coming in from Georgia's Senate race. This one as tight as it can possibly be. Here is where things stand right now. Raphael Warnock, the incumbent here, is ahead by 17,491 votes. You can see right now 49.2% to 48.7% for Herschel Walker in terms of the share. 96% of the estimated vote is in. Keep in mind, neither one of them have hit 50% plus one, which is what you need for this race to be called and not go to a runoff. The chief operating officer of the Georgia elections, Gabe Sterling, has said that this is heading for a runoff. We'll see if that's the case, but they have to get to that 50 plus one. And right now, that is not where we are, although Raphael Warnock is ahead, as I said, by 17,491 votes. The runoff, if there is one, is not going to be for another month, not till December 6th. So if the Senate hangs in balance, that's what we're going to be waiting on. So let's go to Atlanta, where Nick Valencia is with the latest. And Nick, second consecutive election cycle, all eyes again on Georgia, the center of the U.S. political universe.
Yeah, we were here for 2020, and it feels like 2020 all over again in some aspects. And the likelihood of a runoff is just, really a matter of time at this point. We're waiting for a press conference from the Secretary of State's office at 2 p.m., where we're hoping that they will give some more indication on how many ballots are left to be counted and perhaps officially announce what they have indicated, not so quietly, that they are preparing behind the scenes for the likelihood of a runoff on December 6th. We did reach out to the Secretary of State's office. They won't give us a number on exactly how many ballots are out there, but they do say among them are some provisional ballots. And look, the campaigns, they're not waiting for this official announcement from the Secretary of State's office. We are told from sources from the Warnock campaign and the Walker campaign that they are preparing for another month of campaigning. One of the big takeaways from Tuesday is this underperformance when you compare Herschel Walker's, the amount of votes that he got compared to Republican incumbent Governor Brian Kemp, who outperformed Walker by 163,000 votes. And sure, this is very concerning for Republicans when they look at that number. What is that going to mean when this runoff happens on December 6th, and how will their political campaigning strategies change? Will we see a visit from President Biden? Will we see a visit here in the Peach State from former President Trump? All that remains to be seen. Again, 2 p.m. press conference from the Secretary of State's office. Wolf.
All right, thanks very much. I want to bring in CNN political director David Chalian, who's looking at all sorts of numbers, including a lot of the exit poll information. Give us the latest, what you're seeing, some of the important developments that we've learned in the past few hours alone.
Yeah, Wolf, just looking at sort of what Georgia voters were thinking about as they were voting in this election that ends up with this very close race that is likely heading to a runoff. So first, among those Georgia voters who said abortion was their most important issue, and that was about a quarter of the electorate, 26% of the electorate, huge Warnock advantage, as you might imagine, among abortion voters, 77% to Walker's 21%. The reverse is true among those who said inflation was the #1 issue in the race. So that made up a larger share of the electorate. 37% of Georgia voters in this race said inflation was the most important issue. Walker won 72% of them to Warnock's 27%. So a slightly narrower margin there, this time for Walker's advantage, but a much bigger category of vote. And then we wanted to get at the candidate qualities that voters were looking at. Among those who said that the candidate shares my values, that's what mattered most to me in my vote in a candidate quality. That is a huge Walker vote. 76% say Walker among that group, 23% voted for Warnock, and that was 36% of the electorate looking for a candidate who shares their values. A similar share, slightly smaller, 32%, said they were looking for a candidate who has honesty and integrity, Wolf, and that was a Warnock advantaged group. 60% of the honest integrity voters voted for Warnock. 38%, Aaron, voted for Walker among those looking for honest and integrity in their candidate.
It's important. Looking at these polls, as we try to figure out whether we will know the winner of this race in the coming days or in a month. All right, thank you so much, David Chalian. And let's go to MJ Lee live at the White House, because MJ, we've been waiting to hear if President Biden would speak, and I know the White House just announcing that we will hear from the president soon.
That's right. This is the White House schedule update that we have been expecting all day. At 4 o'clock Eastern, the president will be giving remarks here at the White House and also, importantly, taking questions from reporters. This, Aaron, as you know, is a long-held tradition here in Washington, D.C., where the day after Election Day, the president will have a formal press conference. And look, we have been talking about the mood here at the White House all day. Biden advisors are feeling vindicated after the results of last night. They feel like they were able to avoid a bloodbath that so many people had predicted and warned about So they're feeling pretty good about that. So do expect that to be reflected in the president's remarks. But I think it's also important to note that there are questions that the president will also have to answer to. For one, how does he plan on governing in this new Washington, D.C.? This is now going to be an environment where Democrats don't control both the House and the Senate. Even in the best case scenario where Democrats do keep the Senate, losing the House means that it is going to be very challenging to govern and get legislations passed. And also, second, what does he see as his role as leader of the Democratic Party? Obviously, we saw a whole lot of Democratic candidates do well by outperforming him. So this is going to be the beauty of a press conference, is he will get asked a number of these questions. So we'll see exactly what he has to say.
All right, MJ, thank you very much. It is going to be crucial as we count down. We'll be getting you ready for that, for the president to give that press conference this afternoon. And still ahead, as we are still trying to count, still trying to see who will control the Senate, who will control the House. The latest from the tight Nevada Senate race, as Democratic control of the Senate remains at this moment up in the air.
Herschel Walker, very, very close. Let's take a look at the latest numbers. We're up on the screen if we can. There you see 49.2% for Raphael Warnock, 48.7% for Herschel Walker, the Libertarian candidate, with 2.1%. If you don't get 50% plus one, there's going to be a runoff on December 6th. Looks like certainly there's going to be a runoff right now. Even though it's so tight, they're both just below 50% right now in Georgia. We also have some projections that we're going to release right now. All right, in the state of Arizona, CNN is now projecting that Eli Crane, the Republican, will be elected to the House of Representatives from Arizona. This is the Arizona District number 2. Eli Crane looks like he's going to be the next representative from Arizona right now. That's one projection. We have another projection from Pennsylvania right now as well. Let's get that up on the screen if we can. Yeah, there you see it. Susan Wild, the Democratic incumbent, she is going to be reelected. We can now project, even though it says too early to call, we're projecting that Susan Wild will be the winner, defeating Lisa Scheller as well. Let's go over to John King at the Magic Wall. So we got two more projections in the House of Representatives. So set the scene for us, what that says to you.
Set this down right here. So you start, let's come back to the House of Representatives. I spent some time in Susan Wild's district earlier in the campaign. She was talking about how important this was to her in the sense of trying to win. This is ahead right now as you come through these districts right here, and you come up here. This is her district, Pennsylvania's 7th district. Look how close of a race this was. Her view, when I visited Wolf, was that if she held on, she believed if she held on, and if Matt Cartwright held on, as you see, he's leading right there right now, that this would protect the Democratic majority. That may be overly optimistic, but the fact that she held on tells you that if there is a Republican majority, and we're not there yet, it will be a very narrow one, much more narrow than Republicans expected. Much more narrow than Republicans expected. Both in the 7th and the 8th district, those were rematches of elections 2 years ago, and in a better climate, they would win them. Look, Arizona, the Democrat Tom O'Halloran, one of the most vulnerable frontline Democrats in a national math. And where are we? This is not a final number. This is leading. So Republicans need 218 to get the majority. It looks like they are on a plodding path to get there, but they're not there yet. It is still, if you come to called races here, there are 203 to 187. So mathematically possible, as you look at the uncalled races, it is mathematically possible the Democrats hold their majority. The more likely scenario, as you look at where those races are, is that Republicans get to a majority, but let's count votes and get through the day. That is what this tells you, that they are leading in enough races. But we've been full of surprises yesterday, some surprises already today, so let's continue the count as we go forward. If the Republicans do keep that and win the majority, though, it's going to be a very narrow one, not what Republicans expected even a couple of weeks ago, especially back a couple of months ago. Now, the point you just made about the Senate is absolutely critical. So let's switch the map and look here. Number one, now Raphael Warnock, the Democratic incumbent, continues to lead in Georgia. But the fact that we are now projecting a runoff means December 6th, we will have another runoff election in Georgia. It was the runoff elections in January 2021. John Ossoff, Raphael Warnock won. That is why Democrats control the Senate right now. That could come down to be the case again. Let me turn this off and just switch maps, because this now gets fascinating as we count the rest, the two left, right? We still don't know who's going to be leading here, But leave that one there, right? We're going to keep that off the board. So where are we right now? Let me come back to where we are. 50-50 Senate, right? Now we come back to our projections here, right? So what do we have right now? The Democrats won this race. John Fetterman won, right? So that gets the Democrats to 49, right? This one we're going to leave. These are all settled. What's left? These two races out here. Right now, the Democrat is leading in Arizona, still a sizable chunk of votes to be counted in Maricopa County and Pima County, elsewhere in Arizona. But for the sake of argument, let's say Mark Kelly holds on to that lead in Arizona. Then we come down here. Look at this math, 49-49. Right now, the Republican candidate, Adam Laxalt, is leading in Nevada. Still a lot of votes to be counted, so we're not done yet. This race now becomes critical, especially if Kelly holds, which is a more sizable lead. If Laxalt wins this race, then we come out to this. If Laxalt wins and Kelly holds on, Georgia will once again determine in a runoff the balance of power in the United States Senate. If Cortez Masto, the Democratic incumbent here, can come back as they count the remaining ballots, mostly in Clark County and Washoe County, the two biggest counties in Nevada, if she can come back and Kelly holds on, then the Democrats will have a majority, and this will be, is it 51? Because of 50-50. If Republicans win this, the vice president still wins the tie. So now that we project this is a runoff, a lot of focus out here in the next several days as they continue to count those votes. This seat here becomes absolutely critical to the Republicans. The Republicans have to have this seat, especially if Mark Kelly holds on to that lead. If the Republicans lose the lead in Nevada and Kelly holds on there, then the Democrats have the majority.
What are the numbers in Nevada right now between Laxalt and
so let's
the
come over,
incumbent Democrat?
let's come over and switch maps so we get our live vote feed here. And so you come up the map. This is it's fascinatingly close right now, but this is the most important number. You see 50 if you round that up to 47. But that's the most important number right there, 80% estimated reporting.
20%.
Right, 20% reporting, and you see a lot of it is right here. 74% of the population in Nevada lives in Vegas and the sprawling suburbs, fast-growing suburbs around it. An incredible competition here. At the moment, this is significant to watch. As this number climbs, does her number climb? Because Joe Biden won Clark County by 9 points. Sorry, I got the cufflink too close to the end there. But if you come down here back to Clark County, Joe Biden wins this county by 9 points. Masto right now is winning it by about 4 points, a little less than that, a little more than that, a little more than 4, a little less than 5. That is absolutely significant. As the other ballots come in, Democrats are saying it's a lot of mail-in ballots. They think they will spread this here. That becomes absolutely key in the game of Senate chess. It's not a game, but in the art of Senate chess, those two Western seats now absolutely critical to understanding. Will Georgia be for the majority again? Or will the Democrats protect their majority out here, and Georgia will be, can they get to 51? Math to do today and
House
tomorrow.
and the Senate, the majorities still very much up in the air.
Very much
at
up in
this
the air.
moment, indeed. Coming up, a very, very big win in Pennsylvania, boosting Democrats' chances of possibly holding on to the majority in the U.S. Senate. And now, a concession in that race. We're live in Pennsylvania. That's next.
Democrats have flipped the Republican-held Senate seat in Pennsylvania. A short time ago, the Republican Mehmet Oz issued a statement saying that he called Democrat John Fetterman and conceded the race. Our Brian Todd joins us with the very latest from Pittsburgh. Brian, look, obviously concessions are important. We've been tracking them. There's been some very important concessions from both parties today. Fetterman, though, had a very strong showing throughout the state.
He certainly did, Aaron, and one of the reasons that he did was because he didn't shy away from campaigning in rural Republican counties where many analysts thought it might be a red sweep. And Fetterman spoke about that strategy of campaigning in those Republican counties during his victory speech early this morning. Take a listen.
I never expected that we were going to turn these red counties blue, but we did what we needed to do, and we had that conversation across every one of those counties.
And he certainly did turn some of those red counties blue. That's one of the reasons he won. Another factor being talked about this afternoon is the endorsement factor. Did Oprah Winfrey's endorsement of John Fetterman maybe help him with those suburban women voters that were so crucial in this race? And conversely, did Donald Trump's endorsement of Mehmet Oz help or hurt him? That's part of the big post-game discussions this afternoon, Aaron.
All right, thank you very much. And there's a post-game in Pennsylvania, obviously not in many other places. As of right now, we obviously still cannot tell you who who will control the Senate or the House. Bakari Sellers is with me, Democratic former state lawmaker from South Carolina, along with Ana Navarro, our political commentator Ashley Allison, who worked on President Biden's presidential campaign, and the Georgia Republican Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan. So, Ashley, President Biden actually campaigned with Fetterman. Fetterman was one of the few people who would have him. Fetterman is one of the few who, came out on top, and it was clear, and we knew that relatively early, while we're still awaiting other races in which Biden was not present. Were people wrong about Biden?
The Biden agenda is what people want. We're talking about raising wages, saving democracy, protecting women's constitutional rights. The voters sent a clear mandate in 2020. And the thing about politics is so funny is that Biden actually did everything possible to deliver on the promises he made for voters in 2020 on the campaign. And so in 2022, you're actually seeing people say thank you, showing up for those candidates. I think we will still see what happens in these other races. I think these Democratic Senate races, they're going to pull it out. Georgia, we all said it was going to go into a runoff. It probably is. I still think Warnock will pull it out. But Biden's popularity, I think, was overplayed this cycle. The agenda and the policies that he is pushing is what people in America want.
Okay, so Lieutenant Governor, this is going to be the crucial question to figure out. Is what Ashley's saying true? Was this a pro-Biden agenda, or was this an anti-election deniers MAGA?
Yeah, I think it's an anti-election. I think there's folks that wanted to flee away from Donald Trump and Joe Biden. I mean, just their travel schedule in the last few weeks was enough evidence to know that folks didn't really want them there. Now, Pennsylvania, he showed up, and some other places President Trump showed up. But at the end of the day, this was an economy question, and folks felt the real economy, and it's hard to explain inflation. It's hard to explain layoffs. It's hard to explain drop in the equity markets, but it's real. People feel it in their paycheck, and they feel it in the anxieties in their community. This was a direct reflection on the economy with some nuances, right? If you break down the Georgia equation, it really became a different scenario.
Although it's interesting, Bakari, if this was really about the economy, you'd expect a repudiation of the party in power. I mean, we just came out today, we just saw average credit card one-year rate is 19%. We haven't seen something that high since 1991. And yet you didn't get some bloodbath red wave. That is not what we saw.
Well, you also had the most jobs created in a 2-year period of any previous president. So, I mean, when we talk about the economy, you can't just talk about it in a vacuum with what's happening a few miles away from us on Wall Street, but actual jobs being created in Georgia and everywhere else. But I think that we might have missed something. And the White House actually got this part right. We were sitting here yesterday, and we were questioning whether or not people were actually voting because of democracy being on the ballot. And we know that was his closing message. And it appears that some people actually did vote like democracy was on the ballot. I think that when we were watching the voters and people were talking about inflation and abortion, there were also some people who were like, I'm scared to death of that crazy MAGA Republican who doesn't believe in democracy. And so I think that that played a role. And one of the things also that has to be stated is that for the last 3 months, I know the White House is spiking the ball, but just across the little street right there, Kamala Harris has been on the road for the last 3 months. In all of these states where Democrats have done extremely well. She deserves her flowers, too. And I think that they figured something out about allowing Kamala Harris to actually get outside of Washington, D.C. and get outside of that bubble and shake free of the advisors.
Well, I mean, I feel like you're hinting at a broader conversation here, which we should have. But I mean,
it's a transition. I'm getting better at TV.
I see where you're going. I see where you're going with that. But this is okay. So we've got President Biden's going to be giving this press conference in just a couple of hours. Well, obviously, we'll hear it here live. Coming into this, you talk about spiking the ball. They are. They're excited. They didn't think it was going to look like this. They said we have defied historical trends. No matter how this turns out, that is true. And yet the bottom line still may be, and we don't know who's going to control the House, but if it is the GOP, the Biden agenda would still be stymied.
That's true, right? So it's hard to claim victory and to spike the football when the Senate and the House may go Republican still. But you know what? Today is the day to do that, because if it goes Republican, the House or the Senate, it's not going to be for days or weeks, maybe even a month when it comes to Georgia. Right. And I want to tell you, though, because I want to talk, I've been dying to talk about Florida.
Yes.
And I think it's being completely misread. I think the narrative is all wrong.
So hold on, let me just put a pause on. The narrative is Ron DeSantis is the king of Florida and has done what no one thought could be done. That's the narrative. Now correct it.
Which I told you yesterday was going to be the case.
Yes.
I told you he was going to win bigly. But listen, Ron DeSantis barely won in 2018 by 35,000 votes by the skin of his teeth against a black, progressive, little-known mayor from Tallahassee, Florida. Yesterday, he won by 20 percentage points. Why? Because he gamed the system. Because he turned Florida into an unlevel playing field. They changed election laws, making it harder to vote by mail. They paraded a bunch of people, black people, that they arrested for voting fraud and paraded them in front of national media. He created an election police. He also was very good in responding to hurricanes and other tragedies. He also invested and laser focused on Miami-Dade. And in the meantime, turnout was 10 points lower than it was in 2018. In 2018, it was 63%. Yesterday in Florida, it was 53%. So that's not a red wave. Red wave is when people go out to the streets and vote. When you have, what you had is a depressed, deflated vote, Democratic vote. And who can blame them when you nominate a corpse? I mean, yes, he won bigly, but he won against a corpse, a political corpse, and that's an insult to corpses. I apologize to cadavers everywhere.
I'm going to just put a pause because I know we will come back, I promise. All right, next, a major victory for the Republican Governor Ron DeSantis. It was. Turnout may be lower, but everybody may remember, Bill de Blasio called it a mandate. Turnout was down, and it was a mandate. If you vote, you vote. All right, what this win for DeSantis could indicate. We'll be back.
Florida's Republican Governor Ron DeSantis won re-election in a landslide victory. He became the first Republican, by the way, to win Miami-Dade County in 2 decades, and he flipped the Democratic stronghold of Palm Beach County as well. Now a decision is looming about whether he'll actually make a White House bid. CNN political director David Chalian is joining us right now. You're looking at some exit poll numbers. It's a very impressive win by the governor.
It is impressive, and these exit poll numbers back up just how impressive it is, Wolf. Take a look among independent voters. They make up about 30% of the overall vote in Florida. Ron DeSantis wins them by 6 percentage points, 52 to 46. In 2018, 4 years ago, he lost independents by 10 points. That's a 16-point swing in his favor. Among Latino voters, we see a similar story, but to even greater degree. So Latino voters this year made up 21% of the Florida electorate. Okay, that's significantly more than they were 4 years ago. They were only 15%. Ron DeSantis wins them 57% to 42%, 15 percentage point advantage among Hispanic voters. He lost them by 10 4 years ago, Wolf. That's a 25-point swing among Latinos towards DeSantis' favor. Look at his approval rating in the state. Florida voters, those that showed up and voted in this election, 58% approve of Ron DeSantis, 41% disapprove, completely opposite of what we see in Joe Biden's approval ratings. And then the question, do you want Ron DeSantis to run for president in 2024? Florida voters in this election, slim majority, 53% say no, they don't. 45% said yes, they want to see DeSantis run for president next time around, Wolf.
I assume Donald Trump doesn't want him to run for president of the United States among those who don't want him to run. All right, David, thank you very much. Just ahead, we'll check in over at the White House. We're expecting to hear directly from President Biden at 4 p.m. Eastern later today. One advisor now tells CNN that the mood over at the White House can best be described, and I'm quoting now, as vindicated. We'll be right back. Plenty of action, but no final answers. We want to welcome our viewers here in the United States and around the world. I'm Wolf Blitzer.
And I'm Erin Burnett, and this is CNN's continuing coverage of Election Day in America. You know, as Wolf said, continuing. Let's emphasize that. Key races are incredibly close. Control of Congress is still hanging in the balance. Every vote that is counted, every race that is called in the next few hours could make the difference, Wolf.
You're absolutely right, Erin. So far, no red wave. Repeat, no red wave. President Biden is expected, I want to remind our viewers, to hold a news conference at 4 p.m. Eastern later today from the White House. We're going to bring that to you live when it begins. Here's where things stand right now. Erin, go ahead and tell us.
In this battle for control of the U.S. Senate, these tight races here in Arizona, let's just show you that one, Wolf, between incumbent Democrat Mark Kelly and Republican Blake Masters. You can see right now Mark Kelly is ahead. Now, there's still a lot of votes still to be counted here, but you've got Mark Kelly ahead here, Wolf, in Arizona. And what do you see in Nevada?
In Nevada right now, Adam Laxalt slightly ahead of the incumbent Democratic Senator Catherine Cortez Masto, 49.9% to 47.2%. Adam Laxalt is ahead by some 22,000 votes right now. Let's go to Georgia right now. Georgia's Senate race between Democratic incumbent Raphael Warnock and Republican Herschel Walker is heading for a runoff in early December. We have our correspondents standing by all over the place, including in Georgia, over at the White House, in Arizona, across the political map. Let's go to Georgia first right now. CNN's Eva McKen is in Atlanta with the latest for us. So far, Eva, neither of the two senatorial candidates have reached that 50% margin, 50% plus one. So it looks like in early December there will be another runoff.
There will, Wolf. You know, this was always a real possibility in this state, given the unique nature of how winners are declared. And Senator Warnock, in the last few weeks, as we've been following him on the campaign trail, almost seemed to be preparing his supporters for this potential outcome, imploring them to get out and vote, both in the early vote period and on Election Day, to avoid this possibility, but saying that, you know, he could either win on Election night or 4 weeks from now during a potential runoff. Herschel Walker, though, for his part, was a lot more bullish, not even entertaining a runoff, making these pronouncements, bold pronouncements, that he would win outright on Election Day. That, of course, has not come to bear. Take a listen to how both of them essentially are telling their supporters to hold on.
But whether it's later tonight or tomorrow or 4 weeks from now, we will hear from the people of Georgia.
If you can hang in there a little bit longer, just hang in there a little bit longer, because something good, it takes a while for it to get better. And it's going to get better.
Now, we know that Republicans are feeling a little squeamish this morning, and that is because Herschel Walker underperformed incumbent Republican Governor Brian Kemp, specifically in the suburban areas, earning about 163,000 more votes. So this is going to continue to be a battle ahead for the next 4 weeks here. If anyone thought that this would wrap up on an election night, they were sorely mistaken. Wolf?
All right,
it's going to be a very, very, very exciting few days coming up in Georgia right now. Aaron, back to you.
I know, Wolf, it really is. I mean, all eyes on Georgia. So let's go to Gabe Sterling. He is the Chief Operating Officer at the Georgia Secretary of State office. You know, Gabe, as Wolf and I are sitting here, CNN projecting that the Senate race between Senator Warnock and Herschel Walker is indeed headed to a runoff. Are you ready for that?
Well, first things first, we got to go over what Wolf's idea of exciting is. But yeah, we're ready. In fact, the clock's already up in our office. We're 27 days and 6 hours away from polls closing on the runoff Election Day.
All right, so you're ready for that. And I know John King is with me, and I know he's got a specific question here about the runoff and what you're looking at. John, go ahead.
Just information we don't have. So I'm just trying to get to the point where, why are you certain at this point it will be a runoff? If you look at the results, it's 49.2 to 48.7, and we have the estimated outstanding vote here. Maybe you have updated numbers. We have it at 96% estimated reporting, and you're still seeing these circles. A decent amount of votes, a decent share of the votes still to come in Fulton County and the suburbs around it, where Senator Warnock is doing well. You're certain that there's absolutely no possibility he gets to 50.
At 2 a.m. last night, I tweeted out it's pretty safe to say we're going to have that runoff. As we get closer and closer, more votes keep coming in. By our internal estimates, we have less than 10,000 votes to go into the election night reporting for the final counts. You know, I've seen some of these estimates of these votes, and I'm like, I don't know where the hell we get these numbers from, but we know there's about less than 10,000. So there's just not enough numbers out there still to change the outcome of this race.
Right.
So when you think about it, Gabe, you know, you've got now, as you said, 27 days and 6 hours or whatever you just laid out till the polls close. You've already moved ahead for that. But look, you can run, John King can run a scenario very easily where control of the Senate rests on Georgia, we'll see what happens in Arizona and Nevada. But again, all eyes again could be on Georgia. Control of the Senate could rest on Georgia. What are the next few weeks going to look like as you get ready for that?
Well, I talked to Secretary Ruppersberger back in the summer, and he asked what was going to happen. I said, well, given the fact that we are Georgia, it's obviously going to be a runoff with control of the United States Senate on the line, because that's what we do here. So what we're going to be doing really, as far as the election administration side is, we have already lined up and begun building the ballots. All of them will be to the counties by Monday, November the 14th for their sign-off. We'll begin getting the absentee ballot portal is already open. You can begin requesting those absentee ballots. We're working with the counties. They have to have a minimum of 5 days of early voting. There's a very good possibility that we'll probably have voting on Saturday, November 26th in many of the counties if they so choose. And we're planning for that right now. But it's really about getting all the parts lined up so we can get as many votes in so the voters can make their voice heard on that December 6th runoff.
So just to bring something home that Eva was reporting on, you see Herschel Walker underperforming where your governor, Brian Kemp, performed, right? He easily won re-election. The Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, won re-election with 53% of the vote. That's a 9 percentage point margin of victory, right? These were wins, right? These are two people who repeatedly resisted Donald Trump's efforts to overturn the election in your state, and yet they cruised to re-election victory as Republicans, despite Trump attacking them constantly. Herschel Walker is a person Trump has stood fully behind. What message do you think the victories that you're seeing in Georgia in 2 cases and the runoff in a 3rd sends to Donald Trump?
I think the main thing is, you see, if you stood with Donald Trump, you didn't necessarily look like you came out too well at the end of the day. I mean, and frankly, with the people that Trump helped get the Senate nominations, we probably lost New Hampshire as a Republican side because of that. We probably lost Pennsylvania because of that. If McCormick had been the nominee, I think most analysts say we probably would have won Pennsylvania, and the balance of the Senate would not be on the line in Georgia today, more than likely. So I think the main message is voters want stability, and they want candidates who stand up for themselves on their own issues, and not necessarily tied to one personality or another.
All right. Well, Gabe Sterling, thank you very much. You hear it, heading to a runoff in Georgia in 27 days. Thank you so much, Gabe.
I'm sure I'll see you all soon.
I'm sure you will. I'll see you many times before that. All right, and next we're going to check into the White House. That is where they're still waiting to learn who will be in charge at the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue, as we are awaiting a live press conference from President Biden.
We're back with another important key race alert right now. New numbers in the very, very critically important Arizona Senate race. The incumbent Democrat Mark Kelly and the Republican challenger Blake Masters. Let's take a look at the latest numbers just coming in. 69% of the estimated vote is now in. The incumbent Senator Mark Kelly, the Democrat, he's ahead by nearly 90,000 votes over Blake Masters. The challenger, 51.4% to 46.4%. Mark Kelly slightly ahead right now in this critically important Arizona race. We have not yet made a projection in that contest. According to election officials, by the way, in Arizona, there are still more than 400,000 ballots that are left to be counted, specifically in Maricopa County. CNN's Sarah Seidner is in Phoenix for us, where they're currently processing and counting these ballots. What's the latest, Sarah?
About 86,000 of those 400,000 votes that are still yet to be counted here in Maricopa County have been signature verified, and they are counting them as we speak. So those are going through the process. We will know by the end of the evening here, Arizona time, some new numbers for you. But there was some really pointed comments being made by election officials here today. We heard very strong comments about some of the accusations being made by Republicans, whether it be online or on camera to media organizations. Basically, Republicans are accusing Maricopa County of conducting a fraudulent vote. They are also accusing them of being criminal because of some of the issues that happened with the printers that did not work, did not print dark enough ink, and therefore it could not be tabulated in some of the voting centers. I do want to let you hear from Bill Gates, who is the head of the County Board of Supervisors here in Maricopa County, responding to what happened because of all that and to the accusations being made against him and all the officials here who have worked through the night to try to make sure that every single vote is counted.
When they say criminal, I don't know what they're talking about. There was a lawsuit that was filed in Maricopa County Superior Court. I didn't follow the entire hearing, but I don't think the word criminal came out of the mouth of the lawyers for Blake Masters' campaign, for the Arizona Republican Party, the RNC.
So you heard that there. He's like, no one in court who sued to try to keep this the polls open longer than from 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. The judge denied that, but no one in court, not the RNC and not Blake Masters' lawyers, said anything about criminal or anything about fraud. They just wanted to have things extended. The judge decided there was not enough evidence to allow that to happen, and polls closed at 7 p.m. as scheduled. The vote continues. We will hear more about the numbers. About 70% of the vote has been counted so far. Aaron.
All right. Thank you very much, Sarah. So we're joined again by CNN political director David Chalian as all eyes are on Arizona. You know, I mean, it's amazing, David. You have 400,000 votes left in Maricopa County this morning. They said 300, right? The numbers, as they figure out the situation, right, they're able to get more and more specific. But as Sarah said, hopefully knowing by tonight, you know.
Yeah, and what's so important to understand, right, is that the ballots that get dropped off later or on Election Day, at least in 2020, they were materially different. That was much more a pro-Trump vote or Republican vote for those late arriving ballots into Maricopa. And that's why 2 years ago, we saw the Biden lead dramatically narrow to end up only winning that state by 11,000 votes.
Yeah, I mean, it is pretty incredible, right? So we'll see what happens as that comes in. You know, it's like hour by hour, and obviously with the time change to the East Coast, as Sarah said, it could be very late tonight before we get another massive sense of how things are going. But what do you know about from the exit polls or from what voters in Arizona were saying?
Yeah, so we wanted to take in a look at this issue of sort of election denialism, because Arizona has been sort of the hotbed of election denialism in this campaign season, Aaron. And so we asked voters, are you confident that your state's elections are fair and accurate? And Arizona voters in this election, the plurality, 43%, say they're very confident. 30% say somewhat confident. And the smaller groups by far are 18% not very confident, 8% not at all confident. So now I want to look at how those two larger groups, how they split their vote between Kelly and Masters in the Senate race. So among those who are very confident, that largest share, that 43%, who are very confident in the state's elections, Kelly wins them 85% to Masters 13%. Now that next share, the 30% who said they're just somewhat confident that the election is fair and accurate, that's a Blake Masters group. He wins them 63% to 34%. We also asked whether or not voters thought Joe Biden legitimately won the 2020 election. So overall, the electorate in Arizona, 63% say yes, but more than a third, 35% of Arizona voters in this election said no. Joe Biden was not the legitimately elected president in 2020. I mean, they believe that falsely, obviously. So let's look, of course, how these votes split. So among those who think Biden was legitimately elected, which is a much larger group, 63%, Kelly wins them going away, 78% to 19%. And of course, as you might expect, among those who do not think Joe Biden was legitimately elected, who falsely believe that, I mean, that's just the base of Masters support here, right? 94% of them go to Masters, 3% go to Kelly, but they make up a much smaller share, about a third of the overall vote.
It's pretty amazing. I have to say, I don't ever remember a time seeing 94% of anything on an exit poll. You may have just made history there.
94% of election deniers support Blake Masters in this race, yes.
All right. Thank you so much to David Chalian. And next, we're going to go back to the magic wall, talk about where the balance of Congress appears to be headed, as still we do not know who will control the House or the Senate.
We're continuing to bring you the results and the projections with all eyes right now on control of the House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate. especially over at the White House. They're watching this so closely. President Biden is expected to hold a news conference at 4 p.m. Eastern later today. CNN, of course, will have live coverage. CNN's White House correspondent Phil Mattingly is joining us right now with the latest. So what's the mood like over there right now, Phil, this afternoon as we see these results coming in?
You know, Wolf, in conversations with more than a half dozen senior advisors over the course of the last 12 hours, you pick up kind of a mix of vindication and resolve. And those two descriptions aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. I think they kind of tie into one another, and it will get to something that I think you'll hear the president talk about in just a couple of hours in that post-election press conference. White House officials have been very clear. They believe that their kind of multi-pronged messaging approach in the lead up to the midterm campaigns was going to be effective, even as it was being criticized from some within their own party. It's the kind of disparate focus on abortion on one sense, student loans on another, really trying to hit at key constituencies throughout the Democratic coalition and to some degree independent voters as well. They believe the results that have come through so far really kind of back up that approach, vindicate a strategy that some Democrats said wasn't nearly focused enough, wasn't nearly narrow enough to really kind of attack the primary issues that Democrats felt were real vulnerabilities. In terms of the resolve, though, I think there's also a recognition of the reality here. There is a very real possibility, almost a certain possibility, that Republicans will take control of the House, even if it's narrow, and that the Senate is still very much a jump ball, even though they feel comfortable with it. So there's no spiking of the football, but White House officials, Aaron, feel very good about the moment they're in and very vindicated about those who are questioning their strategy leading up to this moment, Aaron.
Right. Bill Mattingly, thank you very much as we await that live press conference from President Biden. Let's go back to John King at the Magic Wall. So, John, coming into this press conference, and it's tradition, obviously, for the president to do this, but he's going to be doing it while it was a much better performance than anybody thought or expected, still not knowing for sure who will control the House or who will control the Senate. And the House, it is incredible at this moment. We still don't know.
The president will speak at 4 o'clock in the East here today. You're right. Not knowing, assuming, but not knowing if the Republicans will control the House of Representatives, not knowing who will control the United States Senate. But he will know this. The Democrats and him, he's the Democratic president, are on track to defy the national historic averages, if you will. Yes. The average is, since Ronald Reagan, you lose 30 House seats. Barack Obama lost 63 in his first midterm. Donald Trump lost 40 in his first midterm. Joe Biden, at the moment, this is where we are when you look at the House. These are ahead. We're not done yet. Right now, as Phil just noted, it looks like Republicans are on a path to a narrow House majority as where we stand now. We have a lot of votes still to count. Leading in 222 races, right? They started with 212. Let me bring the math up here. So at the moment, Republicans have a net gain of 10. These are not called races. I want to emphasize that over and over again. But at the moment, so they're on track 10, maybe a little bit more than that. Remember, you can go back a few months. Kevin McCarthy was saying 60. Then he moved it to 30. Republicans are not going to pick up 60 seats, and it doesn't look like they're going to get anywhere close to 30 seats. So these are the ahead right now, right? So let's look at the uncalled races, right? Well, called races first. Republicans have won 203 seats. Democrats have won 107. It takes 218 to get to the majority, right? So they started with 212. They're at 203. Where are the uncalled races? So we still have these races to call, and you see they're essentially splitting the terrain in the competitive seats right now. So we're going to have to count for days before we know that final number. But without a doubt, Aaron, without a doubt, the Democrats have resisted the historical tides, and that helps the president. Now, you can defy history and still have a more complicated, some would say more miserable, daily existence. If Republicans take the House, that's a setback for Joe Biden in terms of now he has to deal with the Republicans in the House. But he's not going to be dealing with a giant House majority. So it's complicated for him. It may well be very complicated for the new speaker as well.
All right, I guess it gives you context, right? You can do better than expected. You don't have a red wave, and yet you don't necessarily get your agenda. But this whole red wave, wedge tsunami, all of this that you're talking about, those 60-seat scenarios, people really missed it, huh?
So let's go east to west. Number one, you have good Democratic candidates winning in tight races. Two, we have a lot of evidence that the American people are exasperated, maybe mad at the Democrats, but not willing in some parts of the country to take a risk on Republicans they view as too risky. So let's look through it. Let me move the map a little bit. Republicans thought they would pick up some seats in New England. You see that? 6 states in New England. They're all blue. The main one is not done yet. I want to make clear about that. There's some others not done. But at the moment, the idea that Republicans would pick up 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 in New England, take that off the table. So now let's move across the country some more. Michigan, fascinating to me. You see in the competitive races right now, yes, the Republicans win one of them, but Democrats win three. So we go from the east, we move to the west coast here, including this one right here. When I went home at 2:30 this morning, Alyssa Slotkin was behind. But the votes come in. Another frontline Democrat identified by Republicans as vulnerable. A lot of money going in here. Alyssa Slotkin pulls off the race there. So in the Midwest, right, you pop this up again, and you still see a fair amount of blue frontline Democrats in vulnerable districts holding on. If you want to pick one bright spot for Republicans, you come out to Arizona. We still don't know the governor's race there. We don't know the Senate race there. They did flip this race here. Tom O'Halloran, and again, a Democrat running in a district that Donald Trump carried by 8 points, right? So that's a tough tie. So what you're seeing is Democrats in Trump districts had a tough day yesterday. But Democrats in districts Biden won by 2, 3, 4, 5 points, a lot of them, Aaron, scratched it out. And so now the final number, where will that come? It will come as we count a few outstanding races here in the East, and much more importantly, it'll take days to get the final tally out on the West Coast. So no red wave. Perhaps a Republican majority, but no red wave.
Just a little tiny wave rolling in, tiny. All right, thanks so much, John King. And next, new reporting on how Republicans are already preparing for that runoff on December 6th in Georgia and how they plan to rally support around Herschel Walker. And we are back. Key race alert in Nevada, where the incumbent Democratic Senator Catherine Cortez Masto and Republican Adam Laxalt are in an incredibly tight race. Right now, Adam Laxalt is maintaining his lead, 49.9%. His margin right now, 22,595 votes ahead of the incumbent Catherine Cortez Masto, the Democrat. But the key, only 80% of the estimated vote is in, and so much of that outstanding vote is in Clark County, Las Vegas, an area Biden won handily and where Catherine Cortez Masto, of course, have been running ahead of Adam Laxalt. So this is why we are waiting for more numbers to come in there. And our Rosa Flores is in Las Vegas with some new reporting on the vote count coming in. What do you know, Rosa?
Well, Aaron, the new information that we're getting into the CNN newsroom is out of Washoe County. This is in northwest Nevada. And the reason why this is important is you just mentioned that Laxalt was ahead of Catherine Cortez Masto by about 22,000 votes. Well, there's a batch of 20,000 votes that are being counted now in Washoe County. Now, these are mail-in ballots and also drop-off ballots that were not counted yesterday. They are being counted today. So those numbers are not in the tally. We're just learning here at CNN that everything is going smooth sailing in Washoe County. They're expecting to finish that batch of 20,000 votes today, and so we should see that reflected at some point today. Now, once they receive the mail-in ballots from Wednesday, they're going to start processing those as well. So there are more. The big question, of course, is how many more mail-in ballots are out there? And the answer is nobody really knows, because this is the first midterm election in which Nevada has this new policy where every registered voter gets a ballot in the mail unless they opt out. And so long as that ballot is postmarked by yesterday, which is Election Day, it can be counted so long as it comes into the registrar's office by Saturday. And so, Aaron, that is the big question. In a race like this, where the margins are razor thin, this batch of 20,000 ballots is so important, because we could see that margin slim down. We could see it widen for one candidate or another. We just don't know at this point.
Yeah, we just
Aaron?
don't know. And crucial, as you say, the batch, 20,000 that we're awaiting perhaps soon here today. The margin of victory right now, 22,595 in favor of Laxalt. And that's just, as you point out, from Washoe County, not even talking about what still is outstanding in Clark County, home of Las Vegas. All right, Rosa, stay with me, but I also want to bring in Tabitha Mueller now, the political reporter for the Nevada Independent. And Tabitha, you have been watching this and crunching these numbers. I just want to start with where Rosa just finished here, and the point she was making, that they don't yet know how many mail-in ballots there are. So it's very hard to know, if you don't know the overall number, where we are in this process. What more do you know about the mail-in situation in Nevada?
Right. So we don't actually know where the full mail-in numbers, and we're going to still be receiving mail-in ballots through Saturday. But I think it's really important to note that our numbers are showing in Washoe County about 57,000, just looking at kind of the numbers that have come in and what's moving forward. And in Clark County, which is going to be probably the deciding factor in this race, we're seeing tens of thousands of remaining ballots that are likely to be counted. Some estimates even up to 100,000. And what's really important to know about these remaining ballots is that based on voter turnout trends and what we're seeing, these ballots typically go in favor of Democrats. Sometimes, often, what we're seeing right now is a margin of 2-1. So if all of these ballots are coming in and that margin of 2-1 is there, favoring Democrats, Catherine Cortez Masto could still come out on top in this election. However, it is important to note that Republicans did, significant number of Republicans were dropping off ballots from what I could notice at voting sites. So it's still kind of anybody's guess. Also, in addition to Washoe County and Clark County, we're seeing a couple thousand, some scattering of ballots that are still coming in the mail that need to be counted in the rural areas of the state.
All right, so this is obviously, it's really important what you're pointing out, right? If the margins such as they have been historically hold, Catherine Cortez Masto would really end up being able to pull this out. But you don't know how things have changed necessarily, to your point, right? Now that rules have changed, it's easier to vote early, easier to vote a mail-in. Do more Republicans avail themselves of that? Do you think that we will know the results in Nevada before Saturday when every one of those postmarked mail-ins would have to be received?
I do think that we'll start getting an indication of what the results will be, especially as Clark County starts coming in with those tabulations. I will say that we are expecting an update from the Clark County voter registrar's office this afternoon, probably at about 11:30. So that might give us a better indication of how many remaining ballots exactly are there left to count, and when can we expect to know enough of a margin to be able to call a race?
Right, and I just should emphasize to everybody, you say 11:30, so that's 2:30 Eastern for those watching on the East Coast, but that's a crucial time, right? I mean, and you're talking about possibly the entire balance of the Senate at stake. Getting those numbers, what they say at that press conference, could be very important. So we're going to be watching that incredibly closely. Tabitha, before you go, what are the top issue that voters you've spoken to have said they care about, to give us an indication?
So I think it also depends on what voters were talking about. When I was out at polling locations yesterday, I spoke with Republicans who were really emphasizing that the economy was a top issue for them, as well as inflation and high housing costs. I spoke with a voter outside the Sparks Library here in Washoe County, and just down the street you have Siegel Suites, and they're talking about how rent is going too high and they don't know how to deal with it, and what happens if you can't make minimum wage to afford that? Yeah. On the other hand, I spoke with a lot of younger voters at UNR and sort of people that identified as Democrats, and their top issues were abortion, as well as civil rights. And we had some people also talking about trans rights too, in some of the statements that have been made in this election.
All right, Tabitha, thank you very much. Interesting to see what voters care about, Wolf, as we get ready in the next 40 minutes or so for what could be a very important update from Clark County. Very important indeed, Aaron. Thank you very much. I want to bring in CNN special correspondent Jamie Gangel right now, Audie Cornish, CNN anchor and correspondent, and Mark Preston, CNN senior political analyst. Mark, it's interesting. Several Trump-backed candidates lost some key races last night. What's your analysis? Other Trump-backed candidates are sort of trailing even as we speak right now. What's your analysis of how bad of a time this was for Trumpism?
I mean, it was terrible. We had this conversation about this time yesterday about would he take credit or would he take responsibility? And he's clearly not taking responsibility. In fact, what was telling last night, two tells last night. First tell was when he gave his speech down at Mar-a-Lago, because he had a victory party, even though he wasn't on the ballot or what have you. But that's Donald Trump. But when he gave a victory speech, he turned to the Alabama Senate candidate who was going to win no matter what, and used that as an example of somebody who he endorsed to win the seat in Alabama, which is like going to Alaska and endorsing snow, right? I mean, it's there, like it's going to happen. The second big tell is J.D. Vance in Ohio last night when he was thanking everybody for their help and for backing the campaign. Everybody. I mean, in fact, if we had listened to it, the four of us may have been on the list somewhere. Who was not on the list? Donald Trump.
Yeah, he mentioned about 30 names,
right?
And he didn't mention Donald Trump.
Yeah,
and he was a Trump backer.
He was, and one thing this made me think of is there was so much conversation about where Biden needed to be and if it was a hurt or a help for Biden to stand next to a candidate. I think people may, again, review where Trump was and whether or not it hurt or helped.
Right.
In Pennsylvania, bringing Mehmet Oz on stage with Doug Mastriano, a candidate who was very much struggling and had been, pretty well defined by his rival in ads, I don't think that helped Oz. And I think people are going to really be scrutinizing where Trump is helpful. And if it's not in purple and swing states, that's a problem.
Yeah, it certainly is. Jamie, we know Trump, based on our reporting, is fuming right now over the results, at least so far. And he's also fuming that the governor of Florida was reelected, not just reelected, but reelected big time, Ron DeSantis. And Trump is no big fan. You made fun of him just the other night. So you've been talking to Republicans. What are they telling you?
So, to Mark's point, to Addie's point, yesterday was a bad day for Donald Trump. No question about it. It also, by the way, was not a great day for Kevin McCarthy, who it looks like he's going, Republicans are going to take the House. But if it is a slim margin, he's going to have a tricky path navigating it with the Freedom Caucus. But to go back to Donald Trump. So what does this mean to him? He is never going to take the blame. He's going to say, oh, they were weak candidates, not my fault. He'll always take the credit. He'll look at his polls, his ratings, as he likes to call them. But Trump never admits defeat. I do not think, talking to my sources, that this will in any way change. We assume that in the next week or two, maybe the 15th, he is going to announce that he's running. Everybody I spoke to in Trump world and Republican sources say they expect him to go ahead full steam. I will say it does change, I think, the dynamics for GOP presidential hopefuls. People who might not have gotten in the race are going to take a second look, especially since they are seeing that there are Republican voters out there across the country who want to move on from Donald Trump.
Yeah, good point indeed. Mark, the Georgia Senate race, which is so important, is going to a runoff right now in early December. I think December 6th, there'll be a runoff election. You got some new reporting on how the Herschel Walker campaign is preparing for this.
So right now, what we've been told just in the last hour or so, I talked to the Walker campaign, we are seeing the Republican establishment coalesce very quickly behind Walker. And of course, you would expect that to happen, but perhaps even quicker, given what's at stake right now, which is potentially control of the Senate and what little of Joe Biden's agenda may or may not get through in the next couple of years. But I'm told that Ted Cruz will be the first senator we'll see tomorrow who arrive in there, will campaign for Walker. He'll be one of many over the next month. Expect to see a lot of Republican senators down there. What was interesting, what the Walker campaign told me just a short time ago, is that they said it was smart that Joe Biden didn't come into Georgia. It was a very smart move on the Warnock campaign because they weren't able to tie him as tight as they wanted to. What we should expect in the next 3-4 weeks into this runoff is we're going to see an incredible amount of exposure just on Warnock himself and how control of the Senate, the control of the Republican conservative agenda or the establishment of one is going to rest on this race. One thing about DeSantis, because I do think this is really interesting, and in some ways it's sad, DeSantis, a huge winner, we all know that, okay? But DeSantis has a hurricane coming into Florida right now, which is awful, but he can use this as an opportunity to show leadership skills coming off of just an amazing night that he
Or the flip side is that's why people respond to him, because fundamentally he does try and do the job of governing.
Right.
And I think while this wasn't a referendum on Trump in the way people expected, it was a referendum on Trumpism. What does it mean to be that kind of candidate? Does it involve election denial? And do swing and independent voters
actually want to go with you going forward into the future with that agenda.
Yeah, he did have a very, very impressive win in Florida, DeSantis. All right, guys, everybody stand by. A lot more coming up, including we're getting right now some new reporting from Capitol Hill on the Republican plan as we wait to see which party will control the U.S. House of Representatives and the Senate. We'll be right back.
All right, in Washington right now, the fate of the House and the Senate, both unknown, hanging in the balance. And meantime, on Capitol Hill, you've got Kevin McCarthy and Republicans trying to see what's next. We've got Capitol Hill reporter Melanie Zanona with me now. And Melanie, what has the reaction been to the election results on Capitol Hill today? Dripping in, dripping in. We still don't yet know full control, though.
Yeah, exactly right. But the general consensus that Republicans are very disappointed. And I have learned, along with my colleague Manu Raju, that there are around 24 members of the House Freedom Caucus who are now willing to vote against Kevin McCarthy for Speaker. And of course, depending on the margins, that could be enough to put his speakership bid in peril. And now there are 2 votes that McCarthy is going to have to get through. First, there is an internal leadership election among Republicans. He only needs a simple majority for that vote. And then there is a floor vote in January where he needs 218 votes. But the strategy right now among House Republicans is to try to put up a candidate, a challenger, during that first internal leadership election vote, and that way they'll have someone to vote against and to vote against McCarthy for. And the thinking there is that they want to send a message to McCarthy, show him that he doesn't have the votes for that floor vote, and try to force him to the table so that they can demand some concessions out of him. And they want a number of things, mostly related to trying to get more power. Meanwhile, Kevin McCarthy wasting no time trying to lock down these votes. I'm also told that he had a call today where he tapped a number of allies to start whipping support for Speaker. But no doubt, this is going to be a messy process, even if Kevin McCarthy does get there in the end, Aaron.
Certainly, but really important reporting, Melanie, because he would have perhaps thought and hoped it would go very differently. But to have something like this happening already before they can even, confirm that they've won the House, it says so much about what we may be in store for. Thank you so much, Melanie Zanona, reporting live from Capitol Hill. And next hour, we're going to speak with the top official from Maricopa County in Arizona, because that is where, as we talk about not knowing, hundreds of thousands of votes are still being counted in these crucially close races in the case of Arizona for both Senate and governor. The suspense is building. A number of extremely tight races are keeping control of Congress hanging in the balance. Good afternoon to all. I'm Erin Burnett.
And I'm Wolf Blitzer. This is CNN's Election Day in America continued. There's some live pictures coming in right now from the White House. That's where President Biden will be addressing the nation in about 2 hours. The president will also be taking questions from reporters. CNN reporting the White House is feeling cautiously optimistic right now after the results of these elections so far.
Cautiously optimistic, but as we await for President Biden's press conference, we're watching 3 key Senate races because we simply just don't know who will have control. Let's look at Nevada. We're now standing by for a press conference with officials from Clark County, which of course is the biggest county in Nevada, home of Las Vegas. The race here is between Adam Laxalt, the Republican, and the Democrat incumbent Catherine Cortez Masto. We are still 22,595 votes ahead from Adam Laxalt, but again, the lion's share of the votes that are still outstanding are in Clark County, where Catherine Cortez Masto leads. So this race very much unknown right now. So now let's flip it over. Let's look at Arizona. Another close one. The Democrat incumbent Mark Kelly there is still locked in this tight race with Blake Masters, the Republican. Mark Kelly is ahead by 89,969 votes. We are waiting an update from there, and also several 100,000 votes still outstanding in Maricopa, the most populous county there. Let's look at Georgia, because there we are awaiting the Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger. He's going to be speaking any moment. We anticipate about the status here of this race, which you just heard Gabe Sterling, the elections chief there, saying is heading into a runoff. Raphael Warnock, Gabe says simply there aren't enough votes outstanding for this to not go to a runoff. So in the House, let's look at the balance of power. Flip over to the House. Still here, can't tell you. There are still seats that need to be called. 45 seats remaining where we have been unable to make a call. Let's look at where Democrats are leading right now at this hour. of the afternoon. Democrats are leading in 19 of the competitive seats that we are unable to call at this point. Let's flip it over and show you where Republicans have the lead in these competitive races. And there, as you can see, 16 seats. So, too early to call the Senate. Too early to call the House. That's where we are as suspense builds this afternoon. We have a team of reporters standing by in all of these battleground states. Let's start in Georgia, where that Senate race is now headed to a runoff. Eva McKend is there. And Eva, I know we're awaiting an update from the Secretary of State, who just easily won re-election there, Brad Raffensperger, on the race.
That's right, Aaron. You know, given the unique nature of how winners are declared in this state, this was always a real possibility, a potential for a runoff that even could determine the balance of power in the Senate. That is not clear as yet if it will be that consequential. Senator Warnock, though, has always sort of been signaling to his voters that this is a possibility. He had ads up in recent weeks speaking to this, telling people, vote for me because I don't want to interrupt your Thanksgiving. Meanwhile, though, Republican Herschel Walker, he dismissed this potential, saying pretty confidently going into election night that he would win outright. Well, that did not come to bear, and now we have another 4 weeks left of campaigning in this state. Here is how Georgia's one of Georgia's top election officials is assessing this runoff.
I think the main message is voters want stability and they want candidates who stand up for themselves on their own issues and not necessarily tied to one personality or another.
So we know that Republicans have some disappointment here because Walker underperformed Republican incumbent Governor Brian Kemp, who sailed to victory last night against his Democratic opponent Stacey Abrams. Kemp outperforming Walker in suburban areas by about 163,000 more votes. Aaron?
All right, Eva, thank you very much from Georgia today. And I want to go to Arizona now, that race for Senate, as well as that governor's race, which has been so carefully watched between Katie Hobbs and Kari Lake, is still too close to call. Kyung La is live in Phoenix. And Kyung, you are, again, a county you know so well, Maricopa, the most populous, the most important to determining the outcome of the race, it appears like yet again in Arizona.
Yet again, and I'm going to say this yet again, it is too early. There are 400,000 ballots yet to be counted here in Maricopa County. More than half of them have to be signature verified. It is going to take some time. So I'm going to say it again. It is too early. We are seeing at least Democratic incumbent Mark Kelly reiterate to his crowd that they just have to be patient. Take a listen.
I am feeling confident tonight. Now, at the same time, it doesn't look like we're going to have the final results for a little while. And that's okay.
Now, taking a very different tone is the Republican nominee for Governor Kari Lake. I want you to listen to what she thinks about this slow process, which happens every election here in Arizona. She's trying to link taking time to corruption. Take a listen.
I kind of feel like it's a Groundhog Day. We had November 3rd, 2020. That was called Incompetency 101. Then we had August 2nd, 2022, Incompetency in Elections 202. And now we're at Incompetency in Elections 303. We need honest elections, and we're going to bring them to you, Arizona. I assure you of that. The system we have right now does not work.
Let's stress that there is no evidence that anything went wrong with the other elections here in Maricopa County, despite what the politicians are saying, have said, and are still saying. Wolf?
All right, Kyung, thanks very much. I'm here with John King at the Magic Wall. You know, John, we're looking at all these results. There were some bright spots for Democrats and some bright spots for Republicans as well.
Right, and so let's dig deep into Arizona and the outstanding questions. But I just want to start with addressing the question Kyung just tossed to Kari Lake, talking about what she calls incompetency. This is called math. It's not called incompetency. It's called math. Joe Biden won the state of Arizona in 2020 by 10,457 votes. Donald Trump could ask for a recount. He did. Donald Trump sued in court. He did. He lost. That's not incompetency. It is absolutely critical we make this point when someone says otherwise. That is called a Joe Biden victory in the state of Arizona in 2020. Let's come back to where we are now. Why is Kari Lake raising that point? Well, let's start with her race and the governor's race right now. At the moment, she is trailing, but just narrowly. Just narrowly, right? And so you let the process play out. That's how it works. That's how it worked in 2020. That's how it worked in 2016. Donald Trump won. There were some states that were a little slow in counting. So where are we right now? This is the most important number. When you have 50.3 to 49.7, it's the vote that's still out. Somewhere in the ballpark of 30% of the vote has yet to be counted in Arizona. So we need patience. Democrats need patience. Republicans need patience. Everybody needs patience. Maricopa County is more than 60%, about 62% of the statewide population. We'll see how it comes out of the vote share. It'll be roughly that. And you see there's an estimate of about 30%, 32% of the votes still to be counted in the most populous, most important, Phoenix and the suburbs around it, where Kari Lake was once a TV anchor. She's incredibly well known. That will determine this race. And then Pima County, you come down here, it's another 15% of the state population. So 75, a little more than 75% of the population in those two counties where you still have a lot of votes to count. That's called democracy, and sometimes it's slow, and if you're a partisan with skin in the game, yes, it can be frustrating. But Arizona got it right in 2020. There's every reason to believe when we know the final results, somebody will win and they'll get it right in 2022. And again, the other person will have the right to a recount if it's close, the right to go to court if they want. The key here is to let the process play out. But the governor's race incredibly close with the Democrat on top by 11,000 votes and change. You look at the Senate race, the Democrat on top here by a much larger lead. Mark Kelly running stronger than Katie Hobbs, if you will. Blake Masters at 46%. But again, as Mark Kelly noted to his supporters, he feels good about that, and he should. 51, beats 46. But again, it's the same vote count. It's the same vote count. What we are seeing is that Kari Lake is running stronger. Look at Maricopa County. Again, Phoenix and the suburbs around it. Blake Masters getting 45% in the votes counted so far. And then you look at the governor's race. Kari Lake getting 48%. She is at the moment running a bit stronger in the suburbs around Phoenix, and that can matter. But we're on the second day now, and we lived through this in 2020. The most important part, Wolf, is in a complicated, very contentious and competitive battleground state. We need to wait, and it may take some time.
30% of the vote is still outstanding.
Right. It just may well take some time. Now, when it comes to the battle for the United States Senate, you can understand why both parties are anxious to know the final result, because this race is one of three left undecided at the moment, uncalled at the moment, that will be absolutely critical to the balance of power in the Senate. When you come to the governor's race, this is one of the 5 or 6 states that will be critical in American presidential politics for the foreseeable future. And so who do you want, who do you want with the job of certifying the election come 2024? The Republican governor now, Ducey did that. Katie Hobbs was the Secretary of State. Kari Lake has a very different view. So both of these races incredibly consequential, but it's just math. We have to finish.
As we say, the stakes right now are enormous, enormous indeed. Coming up, we'll check in on the races in New York, where the Democratic governor survived a tough fight against her Republican challenger, who conceded just moments ago. We'll be right back.
Moments ago, the Republican Lee Zeldin conceding to Democrat Kathy Hochul in the closely watched New York governor's race. Zeldin was one of a number of Trump-backed election deniers who lost governor's races across the country, including Michigan, Minnesota, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Zeldin had mounted what was a surprisingly strong challenge to Hochul in this election. Ultimately, though, she did prevail. CNN national correspondent Gloria Pazmino has the latest exactly what happened in New York. And Gloria, obviously, this was much closer than anybody could have anticipated. But at the end of the day, Zeldin did lose, and he's now conceding.
That's right, Aaron. In fact, there was a big sigh of relief at Kathy Hochul headquarters last night, which is where I was, as soon as those numbers started coming in from the city. And Lee Zeldin was not able to break that 30% margin here in New York City, where the largest amount of Democrats are registered. That's what his campaign had been hoping for. They fell short of that last night. still declined to concede yesterday at his victory party, but he did just issue a statement a short while ago. I just want to read for the viewers a part of it. He said, "I would like to congratulate New York Governor Kathy Hochul on her election to a full 4-year term. This race was a once-in-a-generation campaign with a very close margin in the bluest of blue states." So Lee Zeldin, of course, making reference there to the fact that leading up to Election Day in the final days, according to some of the polls, this race appeared to be very close. But in the end, the math just did not work out for Lee Zeldin. Governor Kathy Hochul not only becoming the first woman elected governor here in New York, but actually managing to get enough votes. She's up by more than 300 votes, 300,000 votes, I should say, at this hour. And she really was helped by that big turnout here in New York City, as well as wide margins in her home town of Buffalo, where she did very, very well. So Lee Zeldin finally conceding, congratulating the new governor on her full 4-year term. And New York now has elected its first woman governor. Erin?
All right, Gloria, thank you very much. And everyone is back with me. So Lieutenant Governor Duncan, Zeldin was one of the candidates that Trump strongly supported, right? He did not vote to certify, the 2020 election. He wasn't an election denier in the way some were, but he did not vote to certify. So here Trump is last night. He's getting ready to have a big party and celebrate, even though he wasn't on the ballot. And today we hear from Trump advisors that he is livid and screaming at everyone after seeing the results. This is not good for him. His people are not doing as well as he thought they would, or anyone thought they would. So what does this mean for him?
Well, I think there's probably a sense of the gig's up, and the election wasn't rigged, and you can't continue to convince folks that it was. It's like a gallon of milk. It's expired. It's time to move on. There's a tangible feel of a pivot point. My phone's been ringing, emails, text messages from Republicans all over the country that are really seeing this as a pivot point, and it's up to us, right? I call it GOP 2.0. Others may call it something else. But if we really want to take the 2024 cycle seriously, if we really, truly want to beat Joe Biden or somebody else that the Democrats run, then we've got to take this seriously. We've got to start to lead with our policies and start to have solutions that matter. And we can't keep pointing to the past. 2020 was not a rigged election. It was a failed election on behalf of Republicans.
So, you know what's interesting, Anna, in this is to the point that the lieutenant governor is making. Lee Zeldin concedes, okay? Tudor Dixon, an election denier, and she was an outright denier in Michigan, has conceded to Governor Whitmer. They're not following the Trump playbook now. All of a sudden you're seeing, and I'm just picking a few high-profile names, Mehmet Oz conceded, Mandela Barnes just conceded on the Democratic side, Stacey Abrams conceded this time when she hadn't last time to camp, Tim Ryan obviously conceded. People seem to get the message. And some of these people are Trump-backed people, and they're still conceding.
He calls it Republicans 2.0. Some of us call it team normal. It used to be normal that when you lost an election, you called your opponent and you conceded graciously. And then they went onto the podium and gave a concession speech, and the others gave a victory speech. Right. That went topsy-turvy with Donald Trump, who is a sore loser and who is a big liar and who lives in a bubble. And of course, he's got to be livid and he's got to be screaming, because a few things happened. Number one, a lot of the people that he handpicked lost. Number two, a lot of the governors in the crucial states, the election deniers, places like Michigan, places like Wisconsin, places like Pennsylvania have lost. Those are crucial states. And number three, Ron DeSantis, though I think it's hugely exaggerated, who is his, he's his opponent to be,
his nemesis,
had a very good night. And so you put all those three things together, this can't be a happy time at Mar-a-Lago. And there's a hurricane coming. Did I mention that part?
And look, and emphasizing here, Tudor Dixon, obviously, in Michigan, losing and conceding, Lee Zeldin losing and conceding. But actually, there were some election deniers who did win. And by the way, I'm going to put a big pin in Arizona, because we don't know what's going to happen there with Carrie Lake, who's already talking about corruption in this election that has not occurred. 4 election deniers won Secretary of State races races, right? Those are the people who are in charge of overseeing the count for elections. In reliably red states, some crucial Secretary of State races are still too close to call in key swing states. Mark Fincham in Arizona, again, because there's so many votes out, we just don't know. He is an election denier. Nevada, Jim Merchant has the lead currently, but we'll see. Again, a lot of votes still outstanding. You're a lawyer. You specialize in voting rights. What happens if one of those candidates pulls off a win?
We're in danger for our democracy. We cannot let up right now. The people spoke, and they don't want election deniers. But what Republicans did this cycle was they tried to infiltrate the system. So there were many people on the front line, poll workers, election administrators, election defenders, who were out there making sure that every vote is counted, that people can vote safely. But there were still people on the ballot, still people who won, and still people in the Republican Party that want to overthrow democracy. If we think just because Dems had a good night tonight that we can let up the gas and making sure that we fortify our institutions, we're wrong. And in 2024, we could have a recycle again. And these folks, particularly like in Arizona, it's too close to call, and Nevada, it's too close to call. Those will be big states in 2024, and we can't play games with it.
Right. I mean, and those are important to watch what's happening there. Bakari, what do you make, though? Do you see, and again, I don't want to put too much emphasis on it, but these concessions, I've noticed them. They're important. You don't want to celebrate returning to normal. I hear your point, Anna, but yet at the same time, Bakari, it does seem significant that people who went so far out there are now seeming to hear that it's time to stop.
I don't know about that. I mean, we're giving people credit for basic decency, right? When I lost to Henry McMaster in 2014 when I ran for lieutenant governor, I remember asking everybody, does anybody have Henry McMaster's cell phone? And nobody did. So I literally walked over to his victory party, met him backstage, shook his hand, and said congratulations. I mean, but that's not something you should be applauded for. That's like basic human decency. The lowest bar. And I appreciate my Republican friends. I like the lieutenant governor from Georgia, just met him yesterday, talking about GOP 2.0, but you don't really get the chance to wash your hands of Donald Trump that easily. This is still Donald Trump's party. Like everybody who wants
mostly because Lieutenant Governor, he's not going anywhere. He's got this.
I mean, it's not. That's not the biggest point. I mean, Trump as a human being is not the biggest point. I mean, how do you get Trump voters out if you're not Donald Trump?
And listen,
that's the problem they have. I mean, look, you can't be Trump light. That don't work. You got to go all Trump to get Trump voters, and they haven't figured that out.
By the way, Trump light will beat Trump heavy. Because I've lived in Florida, and I can tell you I've seen people drop Jeb Bush like a hot potato for Donald Trump and drop Marco Rubio like a hot potato for Donald Trump, and they will drop Ron DeSantis like a hot potato for Donald Trump.
I think Republicans and Democrats have the exact same problem, and that's the former president and the current president, right? There needs to be a new direction. There's a sense of a new direction, and I call it just being American. Picking up the phone and calling somebody and conceding is an American process.
How do you compare the current president to the former president?
When I talk about 2018, I waited for a concession call.
The other one isn't.
I had to field lawsuits from Stacey Abrams and others. So there's a problem in America, and we can do better, all of us, on both sides of the aisle.
I think it also depends if Kevin McCarthy becomes the Speaker of the House. We'll see what type of Republicans.
They're telling us
well,
to go to commercial.
That's right. And I should say, by the way, on this list of people who have conceded, Stacey Abrams has conceded
there you go.
To Brian Kemp. She did not last time, but she did this time.
And I applaud her for that.
All right. And just ahead, updates on those close races for Senate and governor in Arizona. We're going to be joined by the top official from Maricopa County, where there are, we understand, still about 400,000 ballots outstanding.
We're back with a key race alert right now. Arizona Democratic Senator Mark Kelly, the incumbent, obviously, right now locked in a very tight race with the Republican challenger, Blake Masters. Here's where it stands right now. 51.4% for Kelly, 46.4% for Blake Masters, but it's still plenty of votes out there left to be counted. In the Arizona governor's race, take a look at these numbers right now. This is the gubernatorial contest in Arizona. Let's get that up on the screen. There it is. You see Katie Hobbs with 50.3%, Carrie Lake, Katie Hobbs, I should say, Carrie Lake with 49.7%. So it's very close in the gubernatorial contest in Arizona right now. And this important note to our viewers, about 400,000 ballots are left to be counted in Maricopa County itself. That's the state's largest county. I'm joined now by the chairman of the Maricopa Board of Supervisors, Bill Gates. Chairman, thanks so much for joining us. What's the latest on the status of these remaining votes that have to be counted?
Well, Wolf, thanks for having me. And that's right. We have a little over 400,000 votes that are left to be counted. And so Most of those votes are early ballot votes. Okay, so in Arizona, people can vote early. They can go on our early voter list, and they have a early ballot. And these that are left, the majority of them are ballots that came into us via mail or drop-off this weekend or later. In particular, just on Election Day, just yesterday, we had over 275,000 people drop off an early ballot for us. So that's the large majority of it. We also have about 17,000 ballots left to count from Election Day. And these are ballots that did not go through the tabulator. They were not read by the tabulator for some reason. But they were brought down by bipartisan boards, Republicans and Democrats, down to our central count facility. And those will also be counted later on this week.
I want to bring in my colleague and friend John King, who's following your updates closely, Chairman. He has a question for you, John.
Mr. Gates, grateful for your time. I know you're really busy. So you mentioned about 400,000. You mentioned they are predominantly mail-in ballots. We know in 2020 those mail-in ballots broke disproportionately in favor of Democrats. Do you have numbers? Is that happening in this cycle, or is it different?
Well, what we have seen in the mail-in ballots was that they did, that was our first vote dump at 8 p.m. last night. Those were all mail-in ballots that we received before last Friday. Those did break Democrat, but you have to keep in mind, again, we have no idea how these are going to break, but these are what we call late earlies. So these are early ballots that came in at the end, including on Election Day. So again, in the last couple of cycles, we've tended to see more Republicans showing up on Election Day, of course, to vote a ballot and run it through the tabulator, but also with the early ballot. So I think it's just too hard at this point to try and estimate exactly how those early ballots are going to break.
Your state's Republican candidate for governor, Mr. Chairman, we're talking about Kari Lake, is already stoking some concerns over this election, suggesting that what she calls incompetency is at play, and even comparing this to the 2020 presidential election, which she falsely claims, obviously, was stolen. How do you respond to that?
Well, first of all, yes, I would agree. 2020 was not stolen, was not rigged here in Maricopa County. Our election in that year was, as I have said, one of the most scrutinized in the history of the world. But now let's move forward to 2022. First of all, I do not believe that what happened yesterday can fairly be called incompetence or corruption in any way. Did we have some issues? Yes, we did have issues with people trying to put ballots into the tabulators yesterday in about 20%, at the high point, about 20% of our vote centers. But we were able to address that issue by the early afternoon, and here's the key point for everyone to keep in mind. People who showed up yesterday at the polling places with a valid ID, we do require ID to vote in this state, if they showed up with that and they voted yesterday, that vote has already been counted or it is going to be counted. So that is the key issue. The question is where those votes are going to be tabulated. Either were they tabulated out at the vote center yesterday, or will they be in our central count facility? So I want to underline that. And again, if people have instances or proof of fraud, we want to hear that. But up to this point, we have not. And right now, we are laser focused on getting through this count and doing it in an accurate way. By the way, we anticipate 95 to 99% of the votes will be counted in Maricopa County by the end of the day this Friday.
Well, that's very encouraging indeed, Mr. Chairman. You earlier confirmed there are about 400,000 votes that still are left to be counted. Are there any more that will be coming in from Election Day or after, do you believe? And if so, how many?
Yeah, no, I think that is we don't have the exact figure, but somewhere above 400,000. Again, in Arizona, you have to get your early ballot to us by Election Day. So some states, as long as you postmark it by Election Day, it will be counted. But in Arizona, under our law, we have to have it in hand at the Elections Department by 7 p.m. on Election Day.
Well, you guys are going to be busy, but it's critically important to do a good job. We're grateful to you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Just ahead, President Biden celebrating the Senate win in Pennsylvania, where he personally campaigned. We'll have a live report from the scene. That's next.
President Biden is expected to take questions. He's going to have a news conference. We're taking it live, so you'll be part of it. It is in just over an hour. Officials tell CNN that he is obviously celebrating after the Senate win in Pennsylvania, where the president campaigned with the Democrat John Fetterman, who won that race. I'm joined now by CNN's Brian Todd in Pittsburgh. And Brian, it appears that John Fetterman, obviously the winner in Pennsylvania, his stroke was not the liability that many of his supporters feared it would be.
It turned out not to be that liability, Aaron. In fact, John Fetterman throughout the campaign took all of the criticism and all of the questions surrounding his health and that devastating stroke that he had back in May, and he turned those things into a positive. Repeatedly on the campaign trail, he kept saying that this campaign is about people who get knocked down and get back up. He hit on that again last night, even in victory, when he didn't necessarily have to address those issues of his health. He hit on that early this morning in his victory speech. Take a listen.
I'm just so proud of the race that we ran. And, this campaign has always been about fighting for everyone who's ever been knocked down that ever got back up.
But even in victory, those questions still linger, people wondering whether he's going to have the strength and the mental fortitude and everything to take office and serve as a U.S. Senator. John Fetterman has said that he believes that by the time he takes office in January, he will be back to full strength, or at least very close to it. Aaron?
All right, Brian Todd, thank you very much. So let's dig into the data more with our political director, David Chalian. So, David, what do you see in what happened there?
Well, first of all, Pennsylvania is one of a couple of states that we saw, Aaron, where abortion was the most important issue, not inflation. So I want to take a look at how those voters that said abortion was the most important issue to their vote split between Fetterman and Oz. So overall, they make up 36% of the electorate, people who said abortion was issue number one. And overwhelmingly, you see here, Fetterman wins those voters, 78% to 21%. He put that issue front and center in his campaign. We also asked folks how they're feeling, what are their feelings about Roe v. Wade being overturned. And among the Pennsylvania electorate here, those that said they were downright angry about the overturning of Roe v. Wade, that was 39% of the electorate, Aaron. Fetterman wins 90% of those voters, and it's a pretty sizable chunk. Then we asked about how each candidate was sort of viewed in terms of being too extreme or not. So are Oz's views too extreme? Pennsylvania voters split roughly evenly here, but 50% say yes, just edging out the 47% who say no. That's different when we asked about if Fetterman is seen as, or if his views are seen as too extreme or not. Only 45% of Pennsylvania voters in this Senate race said yes. 53%, a slim majority in this race, said no. And then you were just talking to Brian Todd about Fetterman's health. And that was a question that we had in the exit poll. And we asked, is Fetterman's health good enough to represent the state effectively? You see here, it's an even split, but 50% just edges out there. Yes, can serve effectively. 47% no. Compare that to Dr. Oz's sort of residency issue that Fetterman put into this campaign as an attack line. You know, he lives in New Jersey, and the question was, has he lived in the state long enough to represent the state effectively? 42% said yes, but a clear majority of Pennsylvania voters, 56%, said Oz had not lived in the state long enough to effectively represent it.
It's funny, funny how it is. You learn that actually living someplace is relevant. It's sort of things you think we wouldn't necessarily need to find out this way, but indeed we have. All right, David Chalian, thank you so much. Sure. And we are still awaiting results from several key races. And as we are waiting, the House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy is already looking to secure a potential speakership. We have the details on those machinations next.
Republicans still right now 15 seats shy of achieving their goal of retaking the majority in the U.S. House of Representatives. And as you can see, Republicans currently lead in 16 of the outstanding competitive races. But any Republican majority will be much narrower than the party had, of course, hoped for. This as House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy is moving to quickly try to lock down support to become the next Speaker of the House. as a group of hard-right Republicans are actually right now discussing whether to challenge McCarthy's bid to try to extract concessions from him. Let's bring back Jamie Gangel, CNN special correspondent, Audie Cornish, CNN anchor and correspondent, and Mark Preston, CNN senior political analyst. Jamie, Republicans, they certainly appear to be on track potentially to take the majority in the House, but this wasn't the clear-cut majority they certainly were expecting. Normally, in a midterm election, the party out of power in the White House could score 50, 60 seats, and that certainly is not happening.
Correct. And it's certainly not the way that Kevin McCarthy was hoping to finally fulfill his dream and become Speaker of the House. This is a very narrow margin, and it could cause some real problems for him. So as our colleagues Manu Raju and Melanie Zanona are reporting, a source familiar with the House Freedom Caucus told them today that there are currently around 24 current and incoming members of the Freedom Caucus who are willing to vote against Kevin McCarthy if he doesn't offer them concessions. Kevin McCarthy has everyone on speed dial. We know some of the current Freedom Caucus members. Let's see what some of these incoming folks are like. This is not going to be easy for them.
It's going to be hard. There's no doubt about that. Audie, if Kevin McCarthy has the support to become the next Speaker of the House, it will be with a relatively narrow majority in the House of Representatives, certainly smaller than he had been hoping for. How much more difficult does that make his job if, in fact, he becomes Speaker?
His job would be hard no matter what. He's also seen this movie before, right? He watched Newt Gingrich go down. He watched John Boehner go down. He watched Paul Ryan go down. If anything, I'm interested in what he does differently to appease disparate wings that feel emboldened and strengthened within the caucus. To be honest, I don't know how this changes anything legislatively. I think the plan was always to do a lot of oversight, which meant more hearings for everyone. And I don't know in terms of agenda if they were really all that specific.
Investigation.
Yeah,
let's not forget, a lot of people are going to be investigated.
It is, but would that be different if they had 30 more guys or 2 more guys? I'm not so sure. It really depends on the Senate. Whether there's anything in terms of policy that we'll see that will make the difference.
On that front, Mark, we're looking at a possible scenario out there where Republicans take the House, the majority in the House, but Democrats hold on to the majority in the Senate, albeit narrowly. What would that mean for governing here in Washington?
Well, as the great Dean Warmer once said, the likelihood that anything would get done is 0.0. Now, for the viewers out there, if you don't know what I'm talking about, then you're very young. But look, as Audie...
I think they understand the zero part.
Yeah, they get the zero part. Just type it into the Google, it will tell you. But it's true. Kevin McCarthy is going in extremely wounded right now. Jamie, the reporting from Manu and Melanie and what Jamie's hearing and Audie's hearing and what I've just heard as well is that he will be handing out his concessions across the board. He's going to be like a poker dealer, just flipping out cards. And I've heard that, in fact, it is going to be the real conservatives that make sure that he becomes Speaker, but on their terms.
But who is that? I would love to know. Who are the people in that, to your mind, real conservatives?
Well, I mean, you're talking about the Freedom Caucus. I mean, you're talking about any of the folks who aren't necessarily considered centrists. It's the real rabble-rousers.
He also has a large leadership team, his directing committee, that's 22 people. So he is trying to make promises to that inner circle. And then, as Mark said, there are going to be promises and concessions and committee positions being given out.
But
it's Christmas.
I was just going to say, Marjorie Taylor Greene had already, well, she had already said very publicly, hey, I think I'm going to have some power now. So I do think that puts him in a weakened position. If you've already had people telecasting, guess what we're going to be able to do, and guess what they're going to need to do to appease us. I don't know how that strengthens your position.
He's already said that Marjorie Taylor Greene will have a committee assignment.
Oh, he has. He certainly has. And to be fair to Kevin McCarthy, I don't know who's out there that can challenge him right now that has the operation together to take him out. It's going to be, he's got someone.
I don't have a person in the House. I would like to raise one name.
Oh, history.
Donald Trump. If Donald Trump is still angry with Kevin McCarthy and he wants to cause a little trouble, he can pick someone else. Elise Stefanik, who Donald Trump loves, from New York. went to Harvard. I wouldn't take Donald Trump out of the equation quite yet.
Great point. I agree.
Good point. All right, guys, thanks very, very much. We'll continue this conversation. But coming up, the latest on the key races that will decide who controls the House and the Senate. Plus, we're awaiting remarks from the President of the United States over at the White House. He's expected to speak and answer reporters' questions in about an hour. With control of Congress still being decided, President Biden is about to speak to the nation. I'm Wolf Blitzer.
And I'm Erin Burnett. And this is CNN Election Day in America continued. Less than an hour from now, President Biden, as Wolf said, will be speaking from the White House. It's a 4 p.m. Eastern press conference that we are awaiting. And he is doing this still not knowing who will control the House or the Senate. We're going to bring it to you live, of course, Wolf.
Of course we will. And here's where things stand right now, Erin. In the House of Representatives, after a flurry of projections already this afternoon, there are still 45 seats that need to be called. But the Democrats' path for holding control seems to be right now narrowing a bit. On the Senate side, the number of races without CNN projections is now down to only 3: Arizona, Nevada, and Georgia. And once again, in Georgia, that race is headed for a runoff election in early December. We have correspondents across the electoral map where the votes are still being counted. Let's start in Arizona right now. CNN's Kyung La is joining us from Phoenix. And Kyung, they are deep in the counting process right now. What is the latest?
Well, Wolf, election week continues because, as you just said, Maricopa County, the most populous county here in the state of Arizona, that counting is still going on. I've spoken to all of the top campaigns, and what's happening inside those war rooms are they have their experts out with their pens, their calculators, their computers, and they are doing math. They are trying to figure out what is the path to get them to victory, and that is still very much unknown. Here in Maricopa County, there are about 400,000 ballots that are still being counted. Some of them have to be signature verified. It is going to take some time. And we just got the latest update from Maricopa County's Board of Supervisors, the head of the Board of Supervisors. And he says that the counting will not be over today. Take a listen.
Right now, we are laser focused on getting through this count and doing it in an accurate way. By the way, we anticipate 95 to 99% of the votes will be counted in Maricopa County by the end of the day this Friday.
And he's using those words, laser focused, Aaron, because there are all these conspiracies already swirling online. He says they're focusing on an accurate count. Aaron?
That's right. Just going to get it right. As you say, as John King says again and again, it is about the math. And as we await the math, await the count, we are awaiting a news conference with President Biden, and our Phil Mattingly is at the White House for us now. Phil, he's going to be doing this live. He's going to be taking questions on a much better than expected day, but still a day where he doesn't yet know who controls the Senate or the House. So what do you expect to hear from him?
Yeah, there's a balancing act. I think there's no question about that, and his top advisors are very cognizant of that fact. Not only do they not know who's going to end up holding the majority in the House and the Senate, they understand there's a very real possibility that at least one of those chambers will flip to Republicans. So the question right now going into this press conference is a president and his team who feel very vindicated about a strategy they deployed over the course of the closing weeks of the midterm campaigns, one that was criticized not just by Republicans but by some in their own party. Certainly ended up with a historic result in terms of how first-term presidents from the one party in power do in midterm elections. That is something the president is going to lay out in detail. That is something he is going to make clear, I'm told, underscores the popularity of both the agenda he's pushed forward over the course of the last 2 years, but also the strength of kind of the Democratic coalition moving into the next 2 years of his term. But how he balances the fact that there are still so many uncertainties and the reality that it is very likely at least one of those chambers will be flipping to Republicans. There's going to be a threading of the needle here. There's no question about that. One thing, though, that is very clear, officials tell me there will be no spiking of the football, but there is a sense inside the West Wing that the president and his team are kind of forever underestimated, whether it was during the presidential campaign, past presidential campaigns, certainly at various points through his first 2 years in the White House. They feel like he has not gotten the credit he deserves in certain moments. This feels like vindication, according to one advisor, something you will probably hear at least some element of from the president. How much he leans into that, I think, is still an open question, Aaron.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Phil Mattingly. So let's go to John King. And John, look, President Biden is obviously surely going to point to several big wins for Democrats, right? Fetterman on that list. So what are the biggest prizes so far for Joe Biden and the Democrats?
I'll get to the map in a second. I just want to echo Phil for 1 second, Aaron. We don't know still a lot about the outcome. Joe Biden can say he did much better than Republicans thought he was going to do, and he did much better than what history says would traditionally happen in a president's first midterm. Without a doubt, the president has bragging rights there. The issue is he may well still have divided government, so he may beat history, if you will, but still have a very tough existence with divided government. But where can he crow? You're absolutely right. Look, Joe Biden likes to call himself, when he was the Delaware senator, before he was vice president, the third senator from Pennsylvania. It's where he was born. Not only did John Fetterman win that very competitive Senate race, but there were 4 competitive House races here. Let me just bring up the competitive seats in the House. There were 4 competitive House seats in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Republicans thought they could win 2 or 3 of them. Goose egg for the Republicans in Pennsylvania. They not only lost the Senate race, but they also lost the competitive House races there. In the Commonwealth of Virginia, if you want to stay in the D.C. area, yes, Elaine Luria lost down here in the southeastern part of Virginia, but the other 2 vulnerable Democrats both held their seats, and this one is telling. Abigail Spanberger in a district Joe Biden carried by 6.7%. Republicans thought they were going to get a lot of those districts. If Biden won by 5 or 6 points, they simply did not in Virginia. You can go across the map. I'll just bring out the national map of the House of Representatives, close out the competitive races so you see it all. That we see blue in Michigan, that we see blue in Wisconsin, that we see a little bit of blue even out here in Kansas. Not all these races are called, but the Republicans thought they were going to wipe out the Democrats here. And now we're waiting out on the West Coast. That's the key one, and that's why the president won't be able to say it at 4 o'clock, Aaron. But the Democrats look more competitive in some of the Southern California districts than Republicans thought a month or so ago. So the president can say it wasn't as bad as you all thought it was going to be, but even he can't give you a final number.
Right, absolutely. And as you point out, right, I mean, you could do better than expected, but if you have divided government, you still can't put your agenda through, right? In some senses, a loss is a loss in a macro perspective. Right. But back to the micro, where you're talking about Democrats outperforming, what are some of the big wins for Republicans?
Well, there's one that everybody in this town and Republicans around the country are talking about. That's the Florida governor's race. I'm going to get to it in a second. I just want to say this. This town is often wrong. And so there are people analyzing. It's just the case, right? Donald Trump can't win the Republican nomination. Joe Biden's out after losing Iowa, New Hampshire, and Nevada. And so I would beware of any morning after, when we still don't have the final numbers, analysis. But let me come to the state of Florida, and let me look at the governor's race. There is no question that Ron DeSantis has a story to tell today, right? Can he sell that nationally? Let's deal with that down the road. But does he have a story to tell today? Yes, he does. I just want to show you across the red down here and the red down here. This is Ron DeSantis yesterday against Charlie Crist. 59% of the vote to 40% of the vote against a former governor now in Congress. That's an impressive win, especially when you go back in time, Aaron, to look at Ron DeSantis 4 years ago against Andrew Gillum. See the blue in here? This is where independents live. These are swing counties. See down there? That's Miami-Dade, one of the most reliably Democratic counties in Florida, right? Ron DeSantis won 4 years ago, but he lost Miami-Dade, and he lost some of the counties across the I-4 corridor right here. Fast forward to today, there is no doubt DeSantis can say, see, not only can I win my state, I win the swing areas in my state. I made inroads among Latino voters. That is a great story to tell. The question is, can you sell it nationally? And I want to say this. Remember when Glenn Youngkin won in Virginia? He won against the former governor of Virginia, Terry McAuliffe. You have the former governor of Florida, Charlie Crist. Voters don't like to go backwards. They don't like to go backwards. They like change, or the status quo is preferable to going backwards. So here, yes, Ron DeSantis has bragging rights, but let's be careful not to overinflate it.
Yeah, interesting. And interesting, of course, you bring up Glenn Youngkin. You know, two of those stars of the GOP right now, and they're very, very different people in their the way they conduct themselves. All right, thank you so very much, John King. And next, we'll be joined live by one of the 4 Democratic House candidates who were bright spots for Joe Biden's party.
11 Republicans so far have managed to defeat Democratic incumbents in the House of Representatives. Just 4 Democrats have done likewise, flipping Republican seats in the House. Greg Landsman is one of them, beating incumbent Republican Congressman Steve Chabot in Ohio's 1st congressional district. Greg Landsman is joining us now live. Congressman-elect, thanks so much for joining us. Congratulations to you. I know you managed to flip this seat from the incumbent Republican congressman. What was the recipe for your success?
Well, thanks for having me. And it was a combination of things. I mean, obviously, redistricting made a difference. It was a new district that was more favorable. But it was also the fact that he, had been there for a long time, decades, but was one of the folks who sided with the insurrectionists and Trump on January 6th to overturn an election. And, as an election denier, that put him in a bad place with independents and a lot of Republicans. And so that plus the fact is that, he was known as a, anti-choice extremist, and those two together made it very difficult for him in this new district. And so, we organized well, we had a good message, but ultimately this district said very clearly last night, look, we want to be done with the chaos and the extremism. This is competitive. So, if you're going to be in a competitive district, don't do the big lie and don't be, on the far right when it comes to reproductive freedom.
Yeah, well, you obviously knew what you were doing. As you know, President Biden was criticized just ahead of Election Day for straying from the message on the economy. He focused on threats to democracy, for example, focused to the issue of abortion rights for women. But was that the right message? Did that resonate with voters in your district?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it did. I mean, look, the economy is top of mind for all of us. I've got a young family, gas, groceries, all that stuff is something that we're thinking about and working through every day. And so obviously we're talking about the economy, reproductive freedom. We're in Ohio. We lost that after Dobbs. So that's top of mind. But fundamentally, our democracy is on the line, and we have got to talk about it and be very clear about who's going to protect our democracy and who's working to undermine it. And so I think the president was smart to say, look, before you go into the ballot box, keep this in mind because it's fundamental to everything else.
Congressman-elect, the Democrats, they're clearly and understandably breathing a sigh of relief today that this wasn't what was expected by so many of the so-called experts, a red wave, a big Republican win. But how much of a difference do you think that will make? It will make if Republicans still wind up controlling the House of Representatives, because if they do, they'll control the committees, they'll set the agenda for all practical purposes. What's your reaction?
Well, I hope it makes a big difference. I mean, I hope they realize that what the country's looking for is folks to come together, to be done with the chaos, to be done with the extremism, and to get to work. They want folks passing a whole host of things that are going to help them, right, as they're trying to pay for prescription drugs and they're trying to fill up their gas tanks. I mean, they expect this Congress to get to work and to be better behaved and to just cast aside this hyper partisanship that has held us back for so long. So that's my hope, I think as long as we keep pushing folks to say, look, no matter what, we're all going to have to work together differently and make sure that we're getting things done. And that's where voters are.
Congressman-elect Greg Landsman, congratulations once again. We'll see you here in Washington once you show up. Appreciate it very much.
Thanks, Wolf.
Coming up, as we await President Biden's news conference supposed to begin at the top of the hour, we'll go to Capitol Hill for new reporting just coming in on how this midterm may actually affect the House leadership. We've got some new information. We'll be right back.
We are getting ready for President Biden to speak to the country. He is going to be taking questions, doing all of this really within the next 30 to 40 minutes. And despite dodging a red wave, he's still looking at the possibility of dealing with a Republican House or Senate next year, or both. We just don't know, right? 3 Senate races uncalled, and of course the House. We still don't know the outcome there. Manu Raju joins me now with more on who in the House leadership he could be dealing with. And Manu, this is, maybe it's not the bad case scenario that many Democrats thought they were looking at, but still, this isn't what Republicans were looking at either.
No question about it. They wanted a much bigger majority. In fact, a smaller majority could make Kevin McCarthy's life very difficult. The first thing that he has to deal with is, assuming they take back the House, is getting the votes to become Speaker. And behind the scenes, Kevin McCarthy is moving swiftly. Today, he assembled his whip team. Those are people that are fanning out across the Republican conference to try to lock down his support. But having a small majority means dealing with some of the folks on the hard right of his conference, some of the people who have been skeptical of him, people who are part of the House Freedom Caucus. Now, we are told there are roughly 24 or so members, incoming and new and current members of the Freedom Caucus, who are willing to vote against McCarthy if they do not extract proper concessions in their mind. One of the concessions, having more leverage over the future speaker to essentially oust him if they don't like something that he's doing. McCarthy has resisted that in the past. Also, we were hearing they may put up a challenger against him in the leadership elections next week. Now, that would be a long shot challenge, but Aaron, next week the Republicans will nominate their choice for speaker, and then in January, the first week of January, that speaker needs to have the support of 218 members. That means if there is a narrow majority, just a handful of defections could make McCarthy's life difficult, which is why a narrow majority could complicate things for him.
Certainly, people may, a little counterintuitive, right? That a narrow majority, a narrower victory for Republicans than had been anticipated, could result in more strident and far-right, Republican leadership, and maybe not what many might expect. Now, Speaker Pelosi, in the meantime, held a private conference call today with the Democratic caucus. What are you learning about that?
Yeah, she did speak as part of this Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee meeting to discuss exactly what happened in those House races. Now, the chairman of that committee, Sean Patrick Maloney, lost that race in the New York suburbs. That was one that got a lot of Republican attention. It was a big GOP pickup. She said on that call, she praised him for taking so much incoming fire from Republicans, soaking up a lot of money that would have ordinarily been spent in other districts. Now, what she did not discuss was what her own future is. She did not speak about that at all. Some Democrats believe she's waiting for the House to be called before announcing whether she will try to continue to run the caucus she has dominated over for the past 2 decades. And Aaron, on that same call, Democratic officials were saying they believe there's a, quote, mathematical possibility they could still hold on to the House, even though it is a very narrow path for them to do just that. But at the moment, Democrats are hoping things will turn in their direction, at least keep the majority of the Republicans narrow, if not a long shot effort to try to keep the House despite all odds.
Despite all odds, but as you point out, there is a narrow path. And as for Speaker Pelosi, everyone should remember she told Anderson the other day that what happened to her husband has impacted her thinking about what she'll do next. She didn't say in which way, but she was clear it has impacted that. Thanks so much, Manu. And next, we are awaiting President Biden speaking live at the White House, answering questions. We're going to look at what governing in Washington may look like over the next 2 years as the results come in.
We have a projection just coming into CNN right now. In Michigan, the 10th district, Michigan 10, Republican John James, we project, is the winner in that district. It's a district that's been redistricted because of the population changes, but it's another Republican win. Let's take a look at the balance of power as it stands right now going into these final days before the new Congress comes back. Right now, the balance of power shows 204 Republicans to 187 Democrats. 44 seats still remain outstanding. You need 218 to be the majority in the House of Representatives. But once again, the Congressman-elect John James wins Michigan 10, another Republican win in the U.S. House of Representatives. Meanwhile, the President of the United States has spent the last few minutes tweeting out a new video of him congratulating Democrats on their winning elections. Listen to this.
Joe Biden, congratulations, kid.
How are you, Mr. President?
I'm better knowing you won, I tell you. Hey, Gov, congratulations. I'm so happy for you. I really am.
And it comes as the President of the United States is expected to deliver a statement to the nation, indeed to the world, right at the top of the hour, and then answer reporters' questions at the White House. We'll have live coverage, of course, here on CNN. He'll be speaking about the midterm election results. That's coming up in about a half an hour or so. But right now, I want to bring back Jamie Gangel, Audie Cornish, and Mark Preston. Audie, the president, it's clear the president is suggesting that this was a very, very big win for the Democrats. And certainly the Republicans did not have a win as they had anticipated, certainly by no means along those lines. But what do you think about the president's message? What he's saying coming up at the top of the hour?
Well, I think I don't know if we're going to hear the word mandate, which often happens after an election, but it certainly sort of bolsters the idea that they had accomplishments to run on. And if Democrats in key areas did run on those accomplishments, that was a positive thing to be done. I think the meme-ready, congratulations that they're sending out, which you're going to see on social media, kind of speaks to their savvy about how to send that message. And at the end of the day, anything less than a shellacking was going to be considered good. Right. I think that's just the fact of it. It just wasn't that, and therefore, it's a good day for him.
Certainly not a shellacking, but go ahead.
No, I think this is one of those times where Joe Biden can sit back and say, listen, I've been in Washington since 1973, right? 72 when he was elected. And many of you Democrats didn't want me, and I understand that. But the fact of the matter is, my policies that I fought for helped you,
But do we think he's not okay with that? I do wonder if this White House just said, you know what? You do what you need to do at your races. That's okay. The president's not going to take offense to that.
No. I look at, he will show no offense today, yeah. But deep down inside, every politician, has a heart of glass, right? In some ways, it's easily to break, easily to do that. But I do think it says something, for Joe Biden to come out, I think, today. I think to show real leadership is to try to move quickly beyond the election and say, okay, a couple of races still need to be figured out. The fact of the matter is we've got to get this done, this done, this done, this done.
There's one word we heard him say in those calls, happy. He really is happy today. They may have said that they always exceed expectations or whatever, but nobody was sure what was going to happen in the last 24 hours. Another point I think we should make is yesterday we sat here and I think I quoted James Carville and said, it's the economy, stupid. Well, yes, it was the economy, but it was also abortion and it was also democracy. And those are big wins, not only for Biden, but for the Democratic Party.
Yeah, and there's no doubt that after Bill Clinton was elected president of the United States, in his first midterm, he lost a whole bunch of seats in the House of Representatives. Same with Barack Obama. In this particular case, let's see what happens when the final count comes forward, but it's certainly not going to be as bad as so many had anticipated for the Democrats. We'll pick up this conversation after a very short break. When we come back, as we await the President of the United States to speak, we'll talk more about his political future.
All right, we are awaiting President Biden's first news conference since voters made their choices at the polls. I emphasize choices because we don't yet know what they chose yet in the balance of power. Biden is, though, expected to take a victory lap after Democrats did better than many expected in Tuesday's election. Back with me now, Bakari, Anna, Ashley, and the Lieutenant Governor of Georgia, Jeff Duncan. So, Bakari, we still do not know who will win the House or the Senate. Okay, there is a narrow path still for Democrats in the House, extremely narrow. It exists, though, but we don't know who won. Is it too soon for a victory lap?
No, I think Anna said this earlier. If you're going to give a victory lap, now is the time to do it. What I would ask the president to do, though, is be very, very forward-thinking. I mean, you can spike the ball if you want to a little bit, but let's talk about what you're going to do over the next 2 years. And let's talk about, you know, you and I, the last time we were up here, were questioning whether or not he was going to have any successes. And I have to remind people that all of his major successes, the infrastructure bill, the Inflation Reduction Act, COVID relief, they were all bipartisan. And so I hope that he projects that going forward. And I have a feeling he's going to be more Joe Biden than Donald Trump and saying, this is me, 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 me. I also hope that he acknowledges the work the vice president did as well.
I want to talk to you about that. But Anna, what do you think? I mean, obviously, you know, doing better than history shows or better than expected, if you're still going to lose the House, you know, you got to be careful how you position that.
Listen, everything in life is about expectations. And the bottom line is he beat expectations.
Right.
The way people were talking, even veteran Democratic strategists, it was, you know, Joe Biden should be in bed right now under the covers sucking his thumb, and every Democrat in the country should be wearing a black veil. That did not happen. That entitles him to spike the football. I even think he could do a little end zone dance. And I think he should remind people, and, you know, one of the things that I think this White House and Democrats in general need to do is stop wringing their hands so much about whether you endorse Joe Biden in 2024. That's 2 years away, and start touting the victories. Correct. The truth of the matter is that in the last 2 years, with a very difficult breakdown in Congress, and particularly the Senate, this president has managed to get a lot of bipartisan legislation, major bipartisan legislation done, and he should be taking credit for that, and they should be screaming it from every mountaintop.
And now he may
Oh, and by the way, and they should be doing it in Spanish too.
Well, now he may have now he may end up with the Senate, but not with the House. So it's a flipped situation to what he had before.
Yeah, I hope today President Biden thanks the people. If we go back to 2020, he built a robust coalition and brought people who supported Bernie Sanders, who supported Elizabeth Warren, and might not even originally supported him or wanted him to be on the ticket. But he heard them. He moved on issues around abortion, around marijuana, around student loan cancellation, and then he delivered. And so people saw that, they appreciate it, and organizers worked their butts off this cycle in really, really hard races. The people showed out and voted in really challenging ways, and he needs to thank the people.
To thank the people. All right, so what do you think is at stake here?
Well, certainly President Biden has earned the right to have a good steak dinner tonight and maybe enjoy a bottle of wine, but when he gets up tomorrow, he still has the same batch of issues to deal with. He's going to have to figure out the riddle in Georgia. Does he jump on Team Warnock? Does he stay away?
Right, is he going to go down there?
Then he's got to have to figure out, you know, deal with the whispers of his own party, and is he going to be the nominee in 2024? And then he's got the economy. You know, it continues to unravel. If you work for Facebook today and you're one of the 11,000 that got laid off and all the other endless number of companies that are doing it, you're probably not a fan of Joe Biden or the economy. And so I think he's going to wake up tomorrow with the realities of having to go back to work and deal with some very, very difficult stuff.
And as you point out, got to figure out his future. You know, the exit polls, Bakari showed, you know, 30% of people want Biden to actually run for re-election. That's it. 30%.
That's the question.
And that's going to be the question. Yeah.
So, you know, I think that I do think that the president of the United States has every right to run for president again. I think there's going to be a question that many Democrats have about whether or not that is the appropriate thing. But again, let's celebrate. We'll have that discussion in the future.
Let me tell you who else he needs to thank is Jill Biden and Doug Emhoff. Those two have traveled all over the country.
All right, and we are moments away from President Biden's press conference, his first public comment since last night's election. We'll bring it to you live.
At the White House right now, President Biden is just moments away from holding a news conference about the midterm election results. He will face reporters and the nation with control of the House and the Senate still up in the air as election night in America continues. I'm Jake Tapper. We're back in the CNN Election Center as we wait to hear from President Biden. Let's take a look at where the expectations-defying cliffhanger election stands this hour. In the fight for the Senate, Democrats now hold 48 Senate seats. Republicans have 49. They need to pick up 2 more seats, Republicans, in order to get the 51 seats required to retake Senate control. The balance of power hinging on 3 key Senate races that remain undecided in Georgia, in Arizona, and in Nevada. And it could all come down to Georgia, where CNN projects the contest between incumbent Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock and Republican challenger Herschel Walker is headed to a December runoff. In the House of Representatives, 218 seats are needed to control that chamber. Democrats now trailing with 187 seats compared to 204 for Republicans, with 44 races still uncalled. Republicans closer to winning a majority, although likely not as large as House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy had hoped. As we stand by to hear from President Biden, we are told Biden and his team are feeling vindicated by the results so far. The Democrats bucking historic trends and defying predictions that a red wave would sweep over them in this election. A less upbeat outcome for former President Donald Trump. His endorsements in some high-profile races failing to deliver the swift and sweeping victories many Republicans anticipated. Our political team is in place to cover it all, including Dana Bash, Abby Phillip, Chris Wallace, and Casey Hunt. John King is back at the Magic Wall to show us where and why we still cannot call key races. David Chalian is digging deeper into the issues influencing voters' choices. And Brianna Keeler is at the voting desk monitoring how and when the remaining ballots are being counted. In addition, of course, our correspondents are standing by as more votes come in to be counted and President Biden gets ready to take questions. Let's go right to Phil Mattingly. He's at the White House. Phil, what are we expecting to hear from President Biden when he comes out, which could be at any moment?
Yeah, you know, Jake, there is rarely a moment where the president holds a formal press conference, but this is a format that will give him ample opportunity to really lay out what White House advisors call equal parts vindication and validation. Vindication because they were able to buck those historic trends. They were able to buck inflation that remains at 4-decade highs. And while they have lost and will likely lose the House at this point, they believe it underscores the reality that his agenda is popular, that his approach is popular. And while the president's approval ratings aren't exactly sky high, they have still managed to buck those trends. Now, it is a tricky balancing act right now. Obviously, the Senate and House remain uncalled. White House officials are keenly aware the House is likely to flip, even though it is closer than just about anybody thought it would be. And it raises very critical questions going forward. The president has made clear he would start to think through his decision about seeking re-election after the midterm elections. We are now a day after the midterm elections. And he also has to weigh the possibility of a Washington reshaped, a House Republican conference. No matter how small the majority, dramatically changes what the president can do and what the president will face over the next 2 years. So those are all critical elements that we expect the president to delve into here. But when you talk to White House officials, there is no denying the fact they are very pleased with what they saw last night, very closely watching how the races that are still outstanding play out. But certainly a better night than most people expected, and White House officials feel very good about that in advance of the president's remarks, Jake.
All right, Phil Mattingly at the White House. Let's go to Capitol Hill now, where Manu Raju is. And Manu, you and I talked about this. The man who wants to be House Speaker, Kevin McCarthy, earlier in the year, he had predicted the Republicans would take 60 seats. He lowered expectations since then. But they've got to be disappointed because while there still are about 30 or so races that remain uncalled, this does not look like the sweeping momentum he was hoping for.
And it complicates his path. Even if they do take the majority, which they are on track to take the majority, it could be a very narrow one, which will make governing difficult and also make the first task for Kevin McCarthy difficult. That is getting the votes to become the House Speaker. Now, behind the scenes, Kevin McCarthy is moving swiftly. He assembled his team of whips today in order to fan out across the House Republican Conference, lock down enough support in order for him to become the next Speaker of the House. But there's a problem with the narrow majority that will almost certainly embolden the far-right faction of his conference, the House Freedom Caucus, who we are told is threatening to vote against Kevin McCarthy. Roughly 24 or so members are suggesting they are open to voting against him if they don't get some concessions. Some of those key concessions, putting the idea of impeaching Joe Biden on the table, putting the idea of impeaching some cabinet members like Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas of the Homeland Security Department, putting that issue on the table as well. Now, in order for Kevin McCarthy to get those votes, he will have to cut some of those deals because next week will be the first step in the process. He has to get the nomination from his conference. Half of the members need to vote for him, but then the big vote happens in January, when he would have to get 218 votes in the full House of Representatives to become the next Speaker of the House. And a narrow majority means that a handful of members, if they defect, will complicate that path. And Jake, we are told that those far-right members are looking at the possibility of putting up a challenger against him next week, a long-shot challenger, but one they believe will force him to come to the table. So while they are happy they have the majority, the margins do matter, and McCarthy is contending with that reality right now.
All right, Manu Raja on Capitol Hill. Let's talk about this with my august panel. Dana Bash, let me start with you. What is President Biden going to say? I guess he's going to try to spin this as a victory, and certainly it does seem to be defying expectations as to how many seats Republicans will pick up, but they still are likely to win the House.
The Republicans are still likely to win the House and maybe even the Senate, you're right. But what you're going to hear for sure from the president, according to sources I'm talking to, and I know my colleagues are as well, is a bit of a victory lap. And I know that sounds a bit off and doesn't really make clear that that's the reality of what we're going to see in January. But remember what the White House has been up against. They have been up against even many in their own party saying, why did you end on democracy? Why are you pushing abortion so much? Well, they believe at the White House that that is what helped the Democratic turnout. And if not for that, then it would have been a whole lot worse.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hearing the same thing. Look, this morning I spoke to a source in the White House who said the mood was almost giddy because I think even they beat their own expectations. They tried to put together what they thought was the best closing argument they could under the circumstances, frankly, not really knowing if it would be enough to hold back the gravity of history, the gravity of the president's approval ratings, which are upside down. And I do think that what we saw last night was when you look at the scope of recent American history, the last, say, 40 years, you don't really see incumbent presidents who are as unpopular as President Biden is getting the result that they got last night. And I think that's why you're probably going to hear Biden, with some caution, saying something along those lines. But I will say one other thing. Remember, Biden campaigned as wanting to bring back the soul of the nation. I do think that there's a feeling now that Americans responded to the idea that there should be lines drawn with some of these candidates who went too far on the election denial, too far on the conspiracy theories. And I would not be surprised if you heard him talking about what that means for the country, not just for the Democrats.
You know, Jake, in 2006, George W. Bush lost 30 seats in a midterm, and he called it a thumping. In 2010, Barack Obama lost 63 seats, and he called it a shellacking. Well, clearly, Biden didn't suffer those kinds of losses. It'll be very interesting to hear how he characterizes what happened last night. You know, to pick up on something that Abby said, and I wasn't sure it was going to work, but he, you know, this final pitch, which wasn't about abortion or inflation, it was about democracy. Democracy is on the ballot. Really does seem to have been very effective. When you look at these races, there were a whole lot of election deniers across the country for governor, for senator, especially for Secretary of State, who lost. And I wouldn't be surprised if you hear President Biden reaffirm that and basically challenge what may well be a new Republican majority, certainly or very likely in the House, maybe in the Senate, and say, let's work together. Let's work for, you know, let's focus on what unites us rather than what divides us.